40 miles off the Atlantic coast, the water was black, and the sky was the kind of clear that made the stars look closer than they were. The research vessel was registered to a marine survey company that did not exist. Its real owner was a procurement division 3 layers removed from Vought International's public-facing subsidiaries, and its real purpose had nothing to do with the ocean floor. It sat low in the water under the weight of equipment that had no civilian classification, surrounded by a perimeter of 3 Coast Guard vessels whose crews had been briefed on exactly what they were allowed to know. Below deck, in a compartment retrofitted with enough processing hardware to run a mid-sized city's traffic grid, 14 people stood around a central display table and watched a progress bar that had been stuck at 91% for 4 minutes too long. Director Kaufman stood at the head of the table, with the posture of a man who had spent 30 years learning to look comfortable when the stakes were too high for discomfort. To his left, a Vought senior VP named Hargrove kept touching the collar of his jacket. To his right, 2 uniformed generals had gone quiet enough that their silence had its own weight. Sister Sage stood at the far end of the table. She had said 11 words in the last 2 hours, which was 11 more than she'd needed. Everyone else was watching the progress bar. She was watching the secondary display on her left, the one tracking not just where the Aegis line's output was going, but what it looked like from the outside. The shape of the transmission, the frequency envelope, the particular signature it carried as it climbed through the atmosphere. 93, someone called out. Hargrove straightened slightly. Full-range confirmation gets us a defense contract that rewires the entire soup deployment budget. Homelander stops being a PR asset. He becomes infrastructure. He glanced at Kaufman. We're not selling a superhero. We're selling a weapon system with a face. You need more than strength, Kaufman said. You need proof the strength can be aimed. Exactly. Hargrove's hand found his phone. He wasn't checking messages. He was holding it the way a man holds something he's about to use to call someone with very good news. 95. Sage ran the numbers on the transmission behavior above the stratosphere. She had done this twice already before the test sequence locked. The Aegis line's output frequency was not arbitrary. It had been derived through several generations of reasonable engineering decisions from a base pattern pulled out of deep space monitoring data. The kind of pattern associated with large mobile high-energy sources. The kind of sources that generated their own fields. The rationale at each step of the derivation had been that a deterrent signal should be legible to whatever it was meant to deter. The problem was that legible worked in both directions. She had flagged this to the lead engineer 40 minutes before the sequence began. He had told her the transmission, above low Earth orbit, attenuated to negligible levels. She had looked at his attenuation model and found 3 load-bearing assumptions that were wrong. But the test was already in final lock, and Hargrove was already on his phone, and the compartment had the particular momentum of something that had been planned and funded and approved at too many levels, to be stopped by a concern that couldn't be expressed in a number anyone present was prepared to hear. 98. 100. Full propagation confirmed. The compartment responded the way enclosed spaces respond when expensive things perform correctly. Kaufman shook Hargrove's hand. One of the generals said something to the other. The technical team exhaled with the specific relief of people whose work had just done what it was supposed to do. Hargrove was already stepping away from the table phone to his ear voice, dropping into the register people use when they're delivering good news to someone whose approval they've been waiting on. The Aegis line fired its full output pulse punch through the atmosphere and kept going. Sage looked at the ceiling for a moment. It was a habit, something she did when she was following a chain of logic to its end, and preferred not to let anyone in the room see where she'd arrived. I'd like to flag something for the debrief, she said. Hargrove covered his phone. Next week, we'll do a full review. He went back to his call. His voice carrying across the compartment had the warmth of a man already spending money he hadn't technically received yet. She did not say anything else. The pulse left the atmosphere and kept traveling, thinning as it went, the way all transmissions thin, spreading across distance until it was barely a shape against the background. But a shape is different from nothing. And there were things between stars that had spent a very long time learning to tell the difference. One of them was not close. Not close enough for close to mean anything, but close enough that the shape arrived as something rather than silence, a transmission with structure carrying the specific pattern of a place that had built something to announce itself. A marker. A call. The frequency equivalent of the largest thing in the territory standing at the border and making noise. It had been moving in a different direction. It changed direction. It did not hurry. It simply reoriented toward a yellow star at the edge of one of the quieter arms of the galaxy, and continued, because a place that had just broadcast its own location that loudly was a place worth the detour. The stage was enormous. Vought had spent 11 days converting Dealey Plaza into something that looked less like a memorial and more like a coronation. Red, white, and blue bunting covered every surface that couldn't move on its own. Massive LED screens flanked the main platform on both sides, each one 40 feet tall, each one cycling through footage of Homelander carrying disaster survivors. Homelander at attention during the national anthem. Homelander looking at the camera with that particular expression his handlers called protective resolve, and the rest of the country called reassurance. The audience stretched back past Houston Street, past Commerce, maybe further. Cameras from 14 networks were live. The Department of Defense had 2 generals on the VIP platform. 3 senators sat in folding chairs that had been upholstered specifically for this occasion, because Vought's events coordinator had decided that standard folding chairs sent the wrong message. Ashley Barrett had sent 17 emails in the last 4 hours. She was already on her earpiece, already chewing through a 3rd stick of gum, already watching the density numbers scroll across her tablet with the focused dread of someone who understood that large numbers of people in a confined space was only a good thing until it wasn't. "We're at capacity on the south end," she said to no one in particular. "Tell the perimeter team to hold at Commerce. I don't want anyone crushed before he even speaks." The logistics coordinator next to her said something she didn't register. She was already looking at the main stage. Homelander descended from the sky at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, 3 minutes before the scheduled time, because he did not wait for scheduled times. He came down slow enough that every camera caught the moment fast enough that it still looked like power, and landed on the platform with a lightness that always surprised people who expected something heavier. The noise went from substantial to overwhelming in under 2 seconds. He stood at the podium and let it happen. His suit caught the October sun across the chest panel. He didn't grip the podium. He didn't look at notes. He looked out across 50,000 people with the expression of a man who considered this the natural order of things, and he let the roar build for a full 30 seconds before he raised one hand, not to quiet them, so much as to confirm that, yes, he had heard, and yes, they were right to feel this way. "There is no threat," he said, his voice hitting the speaker system at a volume that carried the full length of the plaza, "that the American people cannot face, because you don't face them alone." The crowd went up again. Ashley checked 3 things at once: aerial perimeter feed network, broadcast delay timer, weather window. Everything tracking. The DoD reps looked satisfied. Senator Calhoun was already leaning toward his aide with the look of a man drafting a press release in real time. Then the northern screen flickered. Not a technical glitch, not a power issue. Something had passed in front of it at a speed the cameras hadn't been designed to catch. and the air displacement arrived at the platform half a second later as a pressure wave that nobody quite understood yet. Ashley looked up. The North Perimeter security team was moving. The section of audience near them was shifting. Not the orderly movement of people guided by ushers, but the lateral pressure of a mass that hadn't seen the problem yet, but had already felt it the way water moves before something heavy breaks the surface. Then the surface broke. He came in from the north end at ground level, which was the last place any of Vought's perimeter teams had been watching. Every threat protocol the company operated assumed aerial approach or vehicle-based breach. He walked. That was the thing that registered wrong before anything else did. Not the size, not the weapon, but the pace. Unhurried. The walk of something that had already run the numbers and found nothing in this plaza worth adjusting its speed for. Battle Beast stood close to 7.5 feet tall, built across the chest and shoulders, the way load-bearing walls are built not for appearance, for structural necessity. His armor was dark and worn at the edges from use, not decoration, and the war mace in his right hand was long enough that its head cleared the fleeing audience entirely, not because he held it high, but because his waist cleared most of their heads. His face was still, alert scanning, categorizing, a predator doing intake on unfamiliar terrain. 4 tactical operators hit him first. Vought's best non-powered field unit. They got their restraint cables on him inside 2 steps. The cables held for less than 2 seconds. He didn't stop moving. The system, rated to anchor a Class B soupy under full resistance, went taut and then went slack, and the 2 operators braced at the anchor points were simply relocated, not thrown, just deposited at distances that made the point without requiring emphasis. One operator on his left flank tried to take his legs. The mace came down once. The hardsuit folded wrong. The other operator on that flank discharged a plasma lance directly into Battle Beast's left shoulder, and the shot left a darkened patch on the armor and accomplished nothing else. He turned and looked at the 4 operators behind him. They did not advance. The audience in the immediate area had already made its decision and was executing it in all directions simultaneously. The network feeds were still live. Ashley was talking into her earpiece with the tone of someone whose training had taken over, because her actual cognition had temporarily gone elsewhere. Homelander was still at the podium. He had 4 seconds of aerial feed before he moved, and when he moved, he did not deliberate. He crossed the plaza in a blur, came down between Battle Beast and the retreating mass, with his arms out, a posture calibrated through many hours of media coaching to read as authority and shield simultaneously. "Stop," Homelander said. Battle Beast looked at him, not with recognition, with the specific attention of something that has just found a data point worth examining. "You picked the wrong country," Homelander said. Some part of the audience had not moved because moving meant looking away, and looking away was something their nervous systems were apparently unwilling to authorize. Battle Beast said nothing. He looked at Homelander the way you look at a lock. You're deciding whether to pick or break. His grip on the mace shifted slightly, a small recalibration, not yet a commitment. Homelander moved first. He crossed the distance in a fraction of a second and drove a full-force strike into Battle Beast's chest, the kind of blow that had on other occasions caved in reinforced concrete and derailed freight trains. The impact produced a flat, hard crack that cut through every other sound in the plaza. Battle Beast stepped back. 1 step. Right foot planted, weight absorbed, stable. He looked down at the point of contact. Then he looked up. Something shifted behind Homelander's eyes in the half-second before the return swing came. Not fear, he had not arrived at fear yet. Something prior to fear, the moment when the nervous system registers that the data does not match the expectation and has not yet decided what to do with the discrepancy. He had hit things with that strike. Things did not step back from that strike and look at him like that. The mace came around before the thought fully resolved. He got his left forearm up in time, and the blow drove him sideways across 12 feet of pavement before his boots caught. The suit's forearm panel showed contact, not structural failure, but a record. A mark. They stood 8 feet apart, 14 live feeds, 47 million viewers in the first 3 minutes, a number still climbing. Homelander's handlers were screaming into Ashley's earpiece. Senator Calhoun was in the VIP bunker. The DOD generals were on secure lines. Homelander had put his best single strike into this thing, and the result was 1 step backward and a return hit that had moved him across a dozen feet of pavement. The arithmetic was simple. What was not simple was performing the arithmetic while 14 cameras watched and 50,000 people occupied every possible exit. He looked at Battle Beast. Battle Beast looked at him. Neither looked away. Evacuation corridor south end now. Skaka, loud enough for the plaza, loud enough for the feeds, but angled at the security team. Civilian priority. I'm managing the threat. He rose 3 feet off the pavement. This ends here. The line landed the way his handlers had engineered lines to land clean, certain broadcast ready. Then one more look at Battle Beast. Long enough for the cameras to catch it. Long enough for him to make sure his face was showing the right thing and not the other thing. He turned south and descended to crowd height, moving into the evacuation flow. With his hand on a child's shoulder, his body angled toward the nearest camera. His expression locked into the one that said he was exactly where he had chosen to be, and doing exactly what he had planned to do. Battle Beast watched him go. He stood in the space the audience had vacated and watched Homelander work the crowd, the positioning, the gestures, the particular performance of someone who understood that being seen mattered as much as what you were doing. He watched it the way you watch a mechanism you've just taken apart and found less complex than the casing suggested. Then he turned north. But not to leave. Not yet. The Vought Mobile Command Unit was parked on the access road behind the north perimeter. An armored vehicle the size of a large truck, bristling with antenna arrays and satellite uplinks, the nerve center of every camera feed and security channel running through the plaza. 3 operators were inside. 2 more were posted outside with rifles they had not raised because raising them had not seemed like a productive decision. Battle Beast walked to it. He took the mace in both hands and brought it down on the vehicle's roof with the focused attention of someone making a specific point. The roof caved. The second strike took out the left side panel. The third collapsed the antenna array into the vehicle's hull in a way that would require the Vought communications team several hours and considerable paperwork to explain. The 2 operators outside stepped back. He looked at them briefly, found them uninteresting, and turned north again. He cleared the perimeter at the same pace he had entered it. Ashley Barrett was still on her earpiece. Her gum was somewhere on the ground. She had no memory of spitting it out. "Tell me we have eyes on it," she said. The voice in her ear gave her partial tracking northbound ground level, approximately 40 miles per hour through the west end. "Continuous," she said. "Do not lose it." She looked at the main broadcast feed, which was still live, which was still showing Homelander with his hand on that child's shoulder, the image already hardening into something usable. Something that could be packaged and distributed and called, presence called, leadership called exactly what they needed it to be. She pulled up her laptop. The vehicle was probably insured. The narrative was not going to fix itself. Somewhere underground, a general stared at the same broadcast for a long time and then said quietly, "Get me the Aegis Line team, every single one of them." Tanked. In the back of a surveillance van that smelled like old takeout and stale coffee, Billy Butcher watched the footage on a cracked tablet. Huey Campbell had gone very quiet. Mother's Milk had his arms crossed, looking at the ceiling running numbers. Butcher set the tablet down. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the wall of the van with the expression of a man who has just found a tool he didn't know he needed and is already thinking about what he's going to do with it. 7 years ta, he said, trying to find something that could put a dent in that bastard. He picked up the tablet again, looked at the freeze frame of Battle Beast walking away from the crumpled command vehicle. And something just fell out of the bloody sky. He set it down a second time. Don't touch it, MM said. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Butcher didn't answer. He was already thinking, ready. 18 hours after Dallas Vaught's internal communications team circulated a memo describing the company's stock drop as a temporary sentiment correction pending narrative stabilization. The memo did not mention that their mobile command unit had been folded in half. Ashley Barrett had not slept. Fourth location in 6 hours. New York Crisis Center, DOD conference call. Secure suite below the tower's operations deck, and now back in the Crisis Center, where 3 walls of screens ran every major feed, and the place smelled like cold coffee and the specific dread of people whose jobs depended on the next 48 hours breaking a particular way. Timeline, she said. Her assistant pulled it up. Dallas, 14 networks, live 50,000 witnesses. 3 dead security personnel, 1 destroyed command vehicle, footage downloaded 40 million times before legal got the first takedown out. Trending hashtags included 2 sympathetic to Homelander. One that wasn't, and one that Ashley stared at for a moment before deciding it did not exist. Lead narrative on the major outlets. Split. Half are running extraterrestrial threat Homelander responds. The other half have variations of Homelander retreats. Kill the second framing. Every outlet that ran retreats gets a call in the next 20 minutes. Tactical repositioning for civilian protection. He chose the crowd over the fight. That's the story. There's footage of him moving away while it was still standing there. There's footage of him with a child on his shoulder during the evacuation. That's what we lead with. Every time. She moved to the next screen. Tracking. Partial. North from Dallas, then east, then it stopped moving in ways our systems can follow. Ground level displacement at variable speeds. It's not traveling in straight lines. A series of position markers formed a rough arc across the central and eastern states on the map, each tagged with a confidence percentage Ashley found deeply unhelpful. What's it moving toward? The analyst hesitated. Best guess. Our response units. Every time we push a team toward a priority location, it changes heading within a few hours. He pulled up the overlay. It's not following roads or infrastructure. It's following us. Ashley looked at the overlay for exactly as long as she needed to confirm she understood it. Then she turned back to her other 11 problems, because the overlay was not going to change, because she stared at it longer. The first hit outside Knoxville came at dawn. 3 armored vehicles moving a Compound 5 shipment from a southeastern hub to secondary storage. A route designated Priority Alpha after Dallas, which bought it. Additional escorts, encrypted routing satellite coverage, and a spot near the top of the internal triage list. It also bought it more radio traffic, more coordination chatter, and a signal density 3 times heavier than the dozen other convoys running through the region that morning. Battle Beast came out of the tree line on the highway's eastern shoulder. The lead vehicle's dashcam caught him for 3 seconds before the dashcam stopped being part of anything. 8-vehicle escort. Revised contact protocols issued at 2 in the morning. The formation went up faster than Dallas, the response time was tighter, and none of it moved the outcome by more than a few minutes. 12 minutes total first contact to silence. He hit the convoy, The way a demolition charge hits a load-bearing wall, not working around the structure, just canceling it. Armored transports went sideways. Tactical vehicles went in other directions. The Compound 5 canisters rated for Class C impact events took the initial force fine. He stacked them against the highway barrier, considered them for a moment with no particular urgency, and then drove the mace through them with enough weight to distribute the contents across 3 lanes. He was not interested in what the vehicles were carrying. He was interested in whether any of them were going to make him adjust. Nothing did. He went east. Homelander watched the Knoxville footage on a private feed in his suite, standing with his arms crossed, jaw set in the configuration, his media team labeled Resolute. "It's following our deployments," said the Deputy Director of Internal Security. "I'm aware. If we reduce the visibility of high-value movements. It found a convoy. We moved at 3 in the morning under full encryption. What specifically are you planning to reduce?" The Deputy Director did not have an answer. "Where is it now?" "Moving northeast." "Our best estimate? Where is it? Not your estimate." "We don't have a confirmed position, sir." The silence that followed was the kind that made people take quiet inventory of how close they were standing to a door. The Deputy Director had been in rooms with dangerous men before, and knew the difference between anger that would stay contained and anger that had started looking for somewhere to go. What bothered Homelander was not just the threat. He had faced threats. What bothered him was the inversion. Something out there was choosing targets before he could get to them, moving through the country at its own pace, picking its own fights, operating on a schedule that had nothing to do with him. He had spent years being the thing that arrived uninvited, that made decisions other people then had to react to. The architecture of that role was not something he examined often. He was examining it now, and he did not like the view. "Get Sage-un," he said, "and pull everything we have, rated Class B or above, within 300 miles of its last confirmed position." Deployment position? Information. I want to know what's in range before it does. The boys had a whiteboard in the back of a rented house in Virginia. Fewer data points than Vought, and according to Butcher's substantially better interpretation. "Spacing," he said, tapping 3 marks. "Knoxville. Forward post outside Roanoke, not public yet. MM's DOD contact confirmed it around 6. Distribution relay outside Frederick." 3 Vought locations in 1 day, Huey said. Not Vought locations, Vought hard points. Every one of these had reinforced security pushed in after Dallas. Butcher circled all 3. "It's not going after what they have. It's going after where they put the most weight." MM was against the far wall. "Military density tracker? That's still just an animal following the loudest noise, Billy. Predator calibrating to resistance level. Different thing." Butcher set the marker down. "A dog chases noise. This thing is identifying the ceiling of what each location can put up, then moving to the next one. Vaught's ratcheting their response because they have to look like they're doing something, and every escalation is basically a location beacon. People are dying at each of these points. Starlight at the window, not asking, stating. Vaught's private military. I know who they work for." Her voice was flat. "Still people, Billy, and there are going to be more of them at the next location and the one after that." "Yes." He didn't hedge it. "There are." He looked at the board. "The question is what we do with the fact that something is dismantling the exact infrastructure we've spent 3 years trying to crack open." MM pushed off the wall. "Don't. Whatever you're about to say next, don't." "I'm not saying anything yet. I'm reading a shape." Butcher picked the marker back up. "It's a very specific shape. Momentum." MM looked at him for a moment, then looked at the board, then back at Butcher. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The Frederick Relay Station had routed Vaught's encrypted traffic for 6 years. After Dallas, it became Priority Bravo 2. Two additional security details hardened backup power, the densest concentration of armed personnel within 40 miles of central Maryland. Battle Beast arrived at dusk and took the outer perimeter apart in 90 seconds, which was an improvement over Knoxville from the perimeter's perspective, and still nowhere near enough. 2 soups on site, Class C, kinetic absorption, Class B2B, enhanced impact tolerance. The Class C got 2 clean exchanges before the mace found a vector. The absorption field wasn't built to handle. The Class B held longer, 8 genuine damage, and earned a fractional recalibration, not respect just the adjustment a body makes when it encounters more weight than the previous obstacle. 4 minutes to reduce the station to something that would need an engineering team and a budget conversation to fix. He stood in the wreckage. Burning insulation ruptured coolant lines, every screen dark. The surviving security personnel had withdrawn to the far end of the grounds and were making no further attempts, which he registered without judgment. But he did not move east immediately. He walked the perimeter of the destroyed facility instead, slowly, the mace loose at his side, not searching, reading. The way a tracker reads a kill site, not for what was there, but for what the resistance had told him about what came next. The Class B had been better than Knoxville. Better meant the gradient was real. Better meant the center of this country was holding something it considered worth defending with improving quality of force. He was not done being curious. He left the facility and went east, and the pace was slightly different than Knoxville, not faster, but more deliberate, a thing that has begun to narrow its range. Ashley got the Frederick report at 9:47 p.m. 40 seconds of reading, then she called Homelander's floor. He's unavailable. Tell him Frederick is gone. Tell him both soups are in medical transport. Tell him the backup routing is compromised and our eastern response grid is running slow for the next 72 hours. A pause. Tell him all of that, and then tell me he's unavailable. Longer pause. Putting you through. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting and hadn't wanted it to be obvious he was waiting. Casualties. 2 critical, 4 serious walking wounded for the rest. The soups recover. Weeks. The station. Gone. Response latency on the eastern grid is degraded. Fast-moving situations in the next 3 days move slower. She had spent enough years in orbit around him to read his silences the way you read approaching weather, by texture, by pressure, by what it suggested about what was coming. This one was different from the ones she knew. The anger was there, but there was something underneath it that she did not have a prior data point for. I want it visible, he said. Next deployment, I want it visible. I want it to come to something I've set up, not something it stumbles into. You want to? I want to choose the ground, not react to where it already is. His voice had the particular steadiness of someone applying conscious pressure to something that wants to move in a different direction. Build it. I'll be there. She sat for 8 seconds after the call ended. Then she opened her planning interface and started building it because that was what she did. And because Homelander asking for something and Homelander not getting it were 2 outcomes with very different consequences for everyone in the building. She did not let herself think too hard about whether building it was a good idea. Midnight in Virginia. Butcher at the whiteboard. Huey with coffee nobody had asked for. 7 points, Huey said. The map had grown since the afternoon. 8. Pennsylvania hit confirmed an hour ago. Butcher added the mark stepped back. The shape was clearer now. Not an arc anymore, more like a funnel. Narrowing. Not random, not rage. Every hit is at a point with more defensive weight than the last. Every hit is closer to the center. He tapped the marker against his palm. It's not finishing with these places. It's practicing on them. Practicing for what? Butcher studied the board. The funnel pointed northeast, toward the tallest building in the city, with the most cameras, the most coverage, and the most to lose. For the thing it actually came here to find, he said. Huey was quiet for a moment. So we just let it run. We understand it first. Then we decide what to do with that understanding. Butcher set the marker down. You can't steer something you haven't mapped. And I've been trying to get at Vought's center for 3 years through doors that don't open. He turned off the light. The 8 marks held in the darkness for a moment, each one a place where Vought's capacity had been tested and measured, each one a data point in a calculation that was still running. Then the dark was complete, and the house was quiet, and to the northeast, something that had crossed interstellar distances in search of a fight worth having was moving through the American night with the focused patience of something that has finally started to believe it's getting close. The Godolphin University campus had been designed by an architecture firm that specialized in institutions meant to communicate permanence and aspiration simultaneously. Wide stone paths, buildings with names on them, a central quad large enough to host the kind of outdoor events that looked good in promotional materials. The trees had been planted at intervals calculated to maximize the effect of afternoon light on the university's signature bronze signage, which was everywhere on benches, on door frames, on the corners of buildings, where 2 walls met, and someone had decided that a flat surface without branding was a missed opportunity. By 8 a.m., the morning battle beast crossed the county line. Most of the residential halls were still occupied. Students who had been told to shelter in place were doing a version of that. Phones out fees, refreshing the particular paralysis of people whose information was updating faster than their decision-making. The room windows on the east side faced the main road, where a column of smoke from a Vought mobile unit that had tried to establish a perimeter on Route 9 was still rising. Nobody had come to explain what that meant. The administration's last all-student message had used the phrase ongoing situation 3 times, and the phrase your safety is our priority twice, and had not mentioned what the ongoing situation was. Vaught's crisis desk had reached the university's administration at 6 a.m. with 3 options: full evacuation lockdown with active defense, and this was the option that the VP of Institutional Partnerships had spent 40 minutes arguing for a coordinated student response that positioned current enrollment as the university's front line, which could be framed as exactly the kind of real-world application the school's curriculum was designed to produce. The dean had taken option 3. He had also quietly called his personal attorney. Ashley Barrett heard about option 3 at 7:15 a.m. and said a word she had committed to stop saying in professional settings. Then she pulled up the enrollment figures, 412 active SUPE-track students across 6 class years, and spent 30 seconds doing the math on what coordinated response was going to look like on every network feed currently burning bandwidth on the Godolphin story. Get me the dean. He's in a coordination meeting. Interrupt it.
My.
She was already typing. And pull every piece of Godolphin content we have on file. Everything with a student face in it. I want to know exactly what we're about to lose if this goes wrong. If. She looked at her assistant with an expression that ended the semantic debate. Pull the files. The school's response group assembled in the main quad at 8:40 a.m. 61 students with combat track designations organized by power class and field experience. Faculty supervisors at the edges. A Vought field coordinator who had driven through the night from a regional hub. and was currently trying to explain tactical concepts to people who had spent their entire training careers learning to deploy their abilities in front of cameras. Most of them had never been in a fight where the other party was not also aware they were being filmed. A few of them were filming right now. One had started a live stream before the coordinator finished his first sentence. His power was low-level pyrokinesis. His channel had 200,000 subscribers, and he had correctly identified that this moment, whatever it turned out to be, was going to be the most significant content he would ever produce. He positioned himself at the left flank where the angle was good. The coordinator was talking about maintaining line integrity. At the edge of the quad, a sophomore named Marcus wasn't filming. He was standing slightly apart from the main group, watching the tree line beyond the north perimeter wall. His school record classified him as Class B enhanced physical capacity, elevated strength, accelerated healing, structural durability, well above baseline. He had come to Godolkin on the strength of those numbers. He had spent 2 years being told what those numbers were worth. And he had developed a gradual suspicion that the number was the thing the school cared about, not what he might actually do with it when something real was happening. He was watching the tree line because the field coordinator kept looking at it, and the coordinator had the eyes of someone who had been in actual fights before. Battle Beast cleared the north perimeter wall without ceremony. A single movement that covered the distance from the tree line to the interior of the grounds in a way that treated the wall as irrelevant. He landed in the maintenance path behind the arts building and walked toward the quad. He heard them first. The particular noise of a large group trying to hold a shape, it hadn't earned too much, talking the wrong kind of quiet underneath the sound of people performing readiness rather than carrying it. He came around the corner and looked at 61 people arranged in tactical spacing, several of whom immediately reached for their phones. He stopped, took the measure of it. The line held for about 4 seconds. Then the field coordinator started shouting, and the group executed what it had been trained to execute: a coordinated multi-vector approach, showers deployed at range. The shape of it, technically sound in the way that something drilled against instructor set parameters is technically sound. The spacing was right. The sequencing held. The angles were correct. It broke in 11 seconds. The first wave came in hard, 4 students' real power levels, genuine intent. The third one hit Battle Beast with a full kinetic discharge that moved him 2 steps back and fractured the stone underfoot. He looked at her, not with the fractional recalibration he'd given the Class B at Frederick, with something closer to attention. She was already reading his repositioning, already loading the follow-through, already thinking past the first hit in the way that most people in her peer group were not. He stepped into her and let her take it. The follow-through landed. He absorbed the force, mapped her ceiling. Then he put her down with a controlled movement, 15 feet of air impact at a speed that left her damaged, but breathing because she had earned a specific kind of response, and contempt was not part of it. The rest of the wave came apart when she landed. What followed was not a battle. It was closer to a structure failing under load it wasn't rated for. Not because the structure was poorly built, but because the thing applying the load had different ideas about what buildings were supposed to withstand. The line fragmented. Some pieces tried to hold coherence and lasted longer. Most didn't. 6 students with complementary abilities managed a combined approach that generated real pressure for almost 90 seconds. Defensive shell, offensive interior 1, student running relay to stabilize the other's output. The shell cracked at the seam where 2 power types that complemented each other on paper ran into an interface problem that controlled training environments had never surfaced. The relay student went down, compensating for the gap. The interior collapsed in 8 seconds after that. The pyrokinesis student lasted until his 3rd exchange, when Battle Beast turned to face him directly. Being observed was a concept the thing he was filming appeared to have no framework for. The student understood in the space of about 1 second that the camera was not a layer of protection. He ran. Others went with him. Not all. Some students kept trying long past the point where trying was tactically coherent, running on something below calculation. Marcus lasted considerably longer than his classification predicted, absorbing damage that should have revised his decision and didn't. And when Battle Beast put him down, it was with a measure of force that acknowledged the ground he had refused to give. He did not file Marcus under garbage. He did not file him under warrior either. The grounds took 40 minutes to clear, not because anything slowed the process, but because the school was large and its population had scattered through it in layers. The dormitory halls had students behind barricaded doors. The library had a group on the upper floor that had decided the high ground was tactically meaningful. The athletics center had students who had gotten the same idea and had the advantage of better structural material. A photography student on the visual arts building's roof had been documenting the entire sequence from an angle that would later be described by a journalist who had never been near any of it as haunting. None of these positions changed what happened in them. The faculty Supi who put up the most sustained resistance was a combat instructor, late 50s. She had clearly been in real fights before she ever set foot on this campus. And she brought everything from that history into the exchange in a way that none of her students had. She made Battle Beast shift his footing twice. Nobody else in the building had managed once. When she went down, she was still breathing. He left her that way. She had earned it in the only accounting that counted to him. Jenkins, Ashley watched the Godolkin feeds with both hands flat on her desk. The live stream count had cleared 11 million when the pyrokinesis students' feed cut. 6 other student streams were still running from dormitory windows, from rooftop positions, from inside the athletics center before the signal dropped. Social media was processing the footage at a velocity that made Vaught's content moderation infrastructure look like it was staffed by one person with a slow connection. "Student heroism framing?" her assistant asked. "On what footage?" She said it as a statement, not a question. "Show me one clip that ends before it shows what happens next. Show me one that doesn't cut off at exactly the wrong moment. There's the Marcus sequence near the Marcus is in a medical transport and the clip ends mid-exchange." She looked at the screens for another moment. "Pull everything we control, all of it. We pivot to unprovoked attack on an educational institution, extraterrestrial aggressor Homelander, coordinating the response." She paused. "Get me the dean. He's been trying to reach you for 2 hours." "I know. I've been deciding what to say." She picked up the phone. "I've decided." Homelander watched the Godolkin footage from his suite with an expression that lived at the border of rage and something colder, more private. The rage was for the footage itself, the volume of it, the angles, the 11 million people who had watched a Vought institution come apart while students broadcast it in real time. The colder thing was for something else. He had flagged Godolkin's combat curriculum 6 months ago, told the institutional team the program was producing demonstrators, not fighters. People who had been optimized for the specific skill of performing power in front of an audience, which was not the same skill as using it when something was trying to kill them. The memo had been written, circulated and filed without producing any action because enrollment was strong and brand metrics were strong and the pipeline to the 7 was functioning, and there was no compelling business reason to restructure something that was generating the desired outputs. The desired outputs were currently trending. He placed one call to the Vought executive who had authorized option 3. The call ran 40 seconds. The executive said very little of it.
"Send."
Battle Beast walked back through the main quad on his way out. Collapsed east wing of the arts building brought down when 6 students tried a coordinated aerial strike, and the platform they'd chosen didn't survive the exchange. Scorched sections of stone path from sustained pyrokinesis output. Medical teams from Vought and campus services both moving through the wreckage with the careful speed of people doing work they hadn't planned to be doing today. He moved through it without looking at any of it. The place he'd spent the last 40 minutes in was not the center of what he was hunting. He had suspected that before he arrived. The past 40 minutes had confirmed it. A center doesn't position its inventory between itself and an approaching threat. It positions what costs less. Godolkin was what costs less. Dozens of people with real capacity, strength, endurance, some actual instinct, and the whole apparatus had taken that material and oriented it toward performance, toward looking impressive in front of witnesses, toward the skill of being seen doing something rather than doing it. He had traveled distances that humans didn't have language for, looking for the specific thing that was worth the distance. He had been on planets where a warrior's entire value was measured in one question: what are you when the thing across from you wants you dead? That was the only honest test. Everything else was rehearsal. This place had been rehearsal with a campus map. But rehearsal meant there was a performance. And performances had a main stage. He looked toward the skyline through the gap, where the east wing used to be east, where the signals were denser, where the defensive weight was heavier, where something the system hadn't spent here was still being held in reserve. Still worth finding. He went over the perimeter wall and didn't look back. In the Virginia house, Butcher had been watching feeds for 3 hours. Second coffee. Hadn't said much, which was not the same as not thinking. 40 minutes, Asa, he said. Through 400 students with powers. Said nothing. It's not there for the fight, Butcher said. It's auditing. Every location it hits, it's clocking what the actual ceiling of that place is, not the rated capacity, the real ceiling under pressure. He tapped the freeze frame he'd pulled from the student footage battle beast at the edge of the quad body angled east. It saw Homelander in Dallas, already knows he's at the top. So why hasn't it gone directly for him? Because it doesn't know if he's worth it yet, Huey said. Because it doesn't know if he's worth it yet. Butcher nodded. And Godolkin just handed it a data point. The pipeline under Homelander is shallow. Everything below the top is demonstrators and inventory. He put the tablet down. Which means when it gets to the source, it's going to want the answer to be yes. It needs the top of the chain to justify everything it climbed over to get there. Starlight was at the window. She turned around. There are students in those transports, Billy. Kids. I know. Not Vought security. Students. I know. He held her look and didn't move off it. And I'm not treating that like nothing. But what I'm doing right now is reading what happened, because if we don't understand what this thing is doing, we cannot get ahead of it. And if we cannot get ahead of it, we cannot do a single useful thing while it finishes what it started. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. Pushed off the wall. What's the move, Billy? Not yet. Butcher looked at the map. The new mark for Godolkin pulled the funnel tighter. The shape it was forming was not ambiguous anymore. We're still 3 steps behind. I need one more data point before I know where to stand. He stared at the board. The shape kept pointing the same direction it had been pointing since Knoxville. Nothing Godolkin had added changed where it was pointing. It only made the argument harder to dismiss. The facility did not appear on any Vought international document that had ever been submitted to a regulatory body, a congressional committee, or a legal discovery request. It appeared on 3 internal registries under a designation that translated in the company's internal asset classification language as Extended Observation Unit 7. The people who worked there called it the shelf. It had been built into a hillside in western Maryland 22 years ago, using a construction company that no longer existed, permitted as a water treatment upgrade for a county municipal system that had never needed the upgrade. The entrance was a maintenance road behind a chain-link fence with a sign that said MWRA, Utility Access, No Trespassing. The fence was the least secure thing about it. Inside 4 levels, each one lower and heavier than the last. The top level was administrative records, medical monitoring shift, scheduling the paperwork machinery of keeping things alive that were not supposed to be anywhere. The second level was containment. The third level was what the staff called the deep storage for assets that had become too unstable for standard protocols, but were not yet approved for termination. The fourth level was not on the internal map that new staff received. Long-term employees knew it existed. Most of them had learned not to ask about it. The facility held 31 individuals as of the morning Battle Beast crossed the Potomac. Vaught's crisis management team had been discussing what to do about the shelf for 6 hours when the Godolkin footage started trending. The conversation had not reached a conclusion because every available option had a consequence attached to it that someone in the room was not willing to accept as their responsibility. Ashley Barrett got the shelf on her radar at 11 p.m. the night of Godolkin. Not because anyone told her. Because she had been at Vought long enough to know that when the crisis team started having conversations she wasn't being included in, it was because the subject matter was something she would later be asked to have no knowledge of. She had learned to treat exclusion as a category of information. She pulled what she could access: asset classification, medical status logs, transfer records, a 14-month-old internal audit that had been marked restricted before it was completed. She read for 20 minutes. Then she called the head of Vaught's legal division and said very carefully, "I need to understand our exposure if the location and contents of Extended Observation Unit 7 were to become publicly known." The head of legal was quiet for a moment. "That's not a conversation I can have over an unsecured line." "I'm not on an unsecured line." Another pause. "That's not a conversation I can have right now." She understood. She closed the files. She opened a new document and began drafting a communications framework for a scenario she labeled for her own reference, worst case, and then realized that was not accurate and relabeled it as second worst case, because the worst case was the scenario in which the facility was exposed while Battle Beast was still inside it, and the whole sequence was being filmed by someone. She began a second document for that one. The transfer convoy that Battle Beast picked up outside Hagerstown was moving faster than standard protocol allowed, and with twice the security density of anything Vought had fielded since Knoxville. 6 vehicles, 12 operators, 2 soup-rated escorts at Class C minimum, encrypted routing, 0 radio chatter. 0 radio chatter was the tell. Vaught's standard convoys ran constant check-ins. Silence meant something so valuable. They didn't want its location broadcast, even on encrypted channels, which meant something so valuable they were afraid of who might be listening on their own encrypted channels. Battle Beast had been tracking the convoy's displacement pattern for 40 minutes before he moved on it. The 2 Class C escorts lasted longer than Frederick's Class B had one of them managed 3 full exchanges before the mace found an angle the woman couldn't cover. And she went down with the specific quality of someone who had given everything available and simply run out of it. The other one held the line over the vehicle he was protecting until the vehicle's structural integrity became the limiting factor, which it did. And then he held what was left of the line until there was nothing left to hold. Neither of them would walk again without medical intervention. Both of them were still breathing when Battle Beast moved past them toward the hillside, the maintenance road, the chain link fence, the sign that said MWRA Utility Access. He pulled the fence out of the ground by two of its posts, set it aside, and walked down the maintenance road to the entrance. The shelf's alert system had been active since Knoxville. When the perimeter breach registered, the facility went to lockdown in 11 seconds. Blast doors, cell reinforcement communications, blackout. The security team on Level 1 had 23 personnel with non-powered armament and 4 with soup-rated equipment. Their protocols had been written for the scenario of a containment breach from inside the facility. The protocols for an external breach were considerably thinner. The blast door at the entrance held for 4 minutes, which was longer than anything else had held since Dallas. The secondary door behind it held for 90 seconds. The tertiary barrier, a pressure-sealed bulkhead designed to contain a Class A power surge from within, lasted 40 seconds against sustained external force before its mounting point separated from the surrounding concrete. After that, Battle Beast was inside. Level 1 was a hallway 20 feet wide and 200 feet long, with offices on both sides. Fluorescent lighting, linoleum floors, the particular institutional smell of a building designed for function rather than human comfort. Security personnel met him at the first junction in a formation that used the hallway walls as structure and held their ground longer than their numbers should have allowed. The confined space worked against Battle Beast in the sense that it removed the tactical flexibility he'd had at every previous location. It did not work against him in any other sense. He moved through the junction and the hallway beyond it, with the adaptation of something that had fought in corridors before a different geometry to the mace. Work angles chosen for the width available, no wasted movement. The armored doors on both sides of the hallway bent when they were used as impact surfaces. The ceiling held better than the doors. The lighting went out in sections as the electrical systems took collateral damage and the emergency panels flickered to red. Level 2 was the containment level. The cells here were thick-walled, individually alarmed built to hold things that wanted out, and had the physical capacity to make wanting matter. Most of them were still sealed. Some of them, during the transfer operation that had been running since midnight, had been emptied, moved to the convoy that was now distributed across the highway in Hagerstown. A few had been emptied in a different way in the hours before the transfer team arrived. Because certain assets had been designated non-transferable, and the implications of that designation had been acted upon with the efficiency that Vaught's operational teams brought to tasks they were not required to document. 3 cells on Level 2 were open and had people in them who were not restrained. 2 of those people understood immediately what was happening and pressed themselves against the back walls of their cells and did not move. The third one, a man who had been on Level 2 for 11 months, whose file listed his power as uncontrolled kinetic amplification and whose reason for placement was described as asset stability concerns, came out of his cell when the door opened and moved toward the sounds of the combat in the corridor with the specific momentum of someone who had been waiting 11 months for a door to open. He was not trying to help the security team. He was not trying to help Battle Beast. He was moving because the door was open, and he had been behind it for 11 months, and the part of his brain that processed options had collapsed to a single available choice. Battle Beast stepped aside. The man ran past him down the corridor toward the Level 1 stairwell, toward whatever was on the other side of the destroyed entrance. Battle Beast watched him go for a second. Then he turned and continued down. Level 3 was different, quieter than the levels above it. The lighting here was lower, not emergency red, just dim, the kind of light chosen by people who had decided that the things being stored here did not require comfortable visibility. The cells were larger, but fewer. The doors were heavier. Some of them had viewport windows with covers that could only be opened from the outside. He walked the length of the corridor slowly. Through the viewport on the 4th cell, a figure seated against the far wall, head down the posture of someone who had been in that position long enough that it was no longer a position and was simply where they were. The figure did not look up when he passed. Through the viewport on the 7th cell equipment. Medical equipment, but not the kind used for treatment, the kind used for monitoring. The readouts were still running. The cell's occupant was attached to several of them and was not conscious. Through the viewport on the 9th cell, a child's drawing taped to the interior wall. A son, a house, 2 figures. Below it on the floor, a pair of shoes that were too small for an adult. He stopped at the 9th cell. He looked at the drawing for a long moment. Not with horror, not with outrage. Those were human responses that required a human framework for what was being stored here. What he felt was something closer to the confirmation of a taxonomy. This was a place where the builders of the system kept the consequences of their own choices. They had enough shame to hide it and not enough to stop producing it, so they built a shelf for it and put it underground and hired people to make sure it stayed there. He had been on worlds run by warlords, by conquerors, by civilizations that ate their own. He had never found the model admirable. He had always at least found it direct. They did what they did and called it by its name. This place did not call anything by its name. He moved past the 9th cell and continued to the end of the corridor. The stairwell to level 4 was sealed with a mechanism he didn't recognize, which was unusual enough to be interesting. He hit it twice. It held. He hit it a third time, with more attention to the mounting structure rather than the door itself. And the mounting structure's relationship with the surrounding wall changed in a way that made the door's holding capacity irrelevant. Level 4 was 12 cells and a room at the end of the corridor with a steel table and 2 drains in the floor. He looked at the room for a moment. Then he turned and walked back through the facility, up through the levels, past the junction. Where the security formation had been past the broken blast doors, up the maintenance road, and back to the highway. Sage was in her private quarters in Vought Tower when her personal line registered a call from the crisis management team. She let it ring. She was looking at a schematic of Vaught's asset network on her personal display. The full version, not the one that had been prepared for executive distribution. The one that showed the actual dependency relationships between the company's visible operations and the infrastructure underneath them. She had been looking at it for 3 hours. The call rang out. Another came in 30 seconds later. She declined it. What she was looking at was a system that had been under stress at its edges and was now beginning to show stress at its second tier. The edge locations, the convoys, the relay stations Godolkin were gone or degraded. The second tier was the network of facilities like the shelf, the parts of the company's operational capacity that the first tier existed to conceal and protect. When the first tier went, the second tier became visible. When the second tier became visible, it attracted the kind of attention that the first tier had been specifically designed to prevent. The system was operating exactly as designed. The problem was that the design assumed the stress would come from investigative journalists, congressional oversight, and whistleblowers' threats that could be managed with lawyers, NDAs, and careful information architecture. The design had not been stress-tested against something that followed armed resistance, the way a current follows a conductor. She answered the third call. "We need your assessment of was. You need to pull everything out of the secondary tier that can be pulled," she said. "Not to protect it, because if it's distributed, it can't be found in one place. Centralize your personnel. Decentralize your exposure." She paused. "And stop reinforcing the secondary sites. Every security unit you push to those locations is a signal. You're making them easier to find. We can't just leave them undefended. You're already leaving them undefended. The reinforcements aren't changing the outcome. They're changing how long the outcome takes." She ended the call. She looked at the schematic for another moment. The call she'd just given that advice and had been about protecting Vaught's operational assets. She had given accurate advice about how to move them. She had not mentioned that centralizing personnel while decentralizing exposure meant the security weight would consolidate around Vought Tower, around Homelander, around the specific locations where Battle Beast would eventually apply the most pressure, regardless of anything she said. She had not been asked about that. Ashley got the shelf damage report at 3 a.m. She read it in the same posture she'd read the Godolkin report, hands flat on the desk, very still. The report covered structural damage to all 4 levels, breach of containment on level 2, status of 31 assets, 12 transferred pre-breach, 6 status, unknown, 8 confirmed in place and unharmed, 3 confirmed casualties, 2 escaped. The phrase, "The 4th level was accessed," appeared twice listed as a significant concern, with no further elaboration on what specifically had been accessed or observed. She closed the report, opened her second worst-case document, added 3 items to it. Then she opened a new document and sat for a long moment without typing anything. The problem she was now facing was not a communications problem. She could build frameworks for communications problems. This was a documentation problem. The shelf's existence was now a matter of physical evidence distributed across a Maryland hillside, and physical evidence did not respond to press releases or media strategy. She started typing anyway because it was 3 a.m., and she had been awake for 22 hours, and the only way she knew how to not think about an unsolvable problem was to work on a harder version of it. Butcher got the information about the shelf from a DoD source who owed him something from 3 years ago and was now in a position where the debt had become more uncomfortable to carry than to pay. The information arrived in fragments, a facility designation, a location, a partial asset list. Butcher read the partial list and was quiet for a long time. "What is it?" MM asked. "It's a storage facility." Butcher set the documents down. "For assets, which is what they call people when they're done pretending they're people." He looked at the list. "There's a column here for what they did with the ones they couldn't keep and couldn't release." MM looked at the column. His jaw tightened. He handed the documents to Huey without saying anything. Huey read the column. He put the documents on the table and walked to the other end of the room. "Godolkin was the factory," Butcher said. "This is the discard pile." He picked up the tablet, pulled up the map, added the shelf's location. The funnel was not a funnel anymore. It was a line, a very direct line. And it's still not the center. Vought moved a dozen assets out before it was hit. Moved them where consolidated men simin, MM said. If Sage's advice is anything like what I'd given her position, she's told them to stop spreading weight and start stacking it. "Stack it where?" MM looked at him steadily. "Where do you stack everything important when you're running out of time?" Butcher looked at the line on the map, at where it ended. "Right," he said. He had known for 2 days where this was going. He had been reading the shape of it. He just hadn't wanted to say it out loud yet, because saying it out loud meant accepting that the next step was a step he was actually going to take. "We need to get into that tower before he does," Butcher said. "Not to stop him, to be in position when everything that's been locked in there finally has to come out." He stared at the map. The line was very clear now. Everything it had passed through Dallas-Knoxville, Frederick Godolkin, the shelf, was behind it. The line did not double back. It did not waver. It had one direction and one endpoint. And Battle Beast had been walking toward it since the moment he changed course in the dark between stars and set his bearing for a yellow sun in a quiet arm of the galaxy. Butcher had been watching monsters his whole career. He knew what it looked like when one of them finally found what it was looking for. He picked up his phone and started making calls. The site had been a Cold War munitions center before Vought acquired it in 1987 and converted it into something that didn't appear in the public record under any useful description. The conversion reinforced the main bay's load-bearing structure to handle Force's standard industrial architecture, wasn't built for installed containment systems drawn from Compound 5 storage specs, and added a sublevel connecting the bay to a series of holding chambers through hardened corridors. When Vaught's coordination team called the DOD with a request, the man they wanted was sitting on the floor of his holding chamber with his back against the wall and an expression that said he knew exactly what was happening. "Get up," said the transfer agent. Soldier Boy looked at him. "You're going to want to rephrase that." Vaught's position on Soldier Boy was complicated. He was their oldest surviving property, a distinction he'd held for decades and never once found flattering. Unstable in ways the company's liability framework wasn't designed for. Destructive in ways that required significant cleanup. Personally objectionable in ways that had become harder to platform with every passing year. He was also, as of the past 72 hours, the most combat-capable thing Vought could deploy that wasn't named Homelander. Ashley had run the numbers 3 times. The 3rd time, she'd asked 2 people to check her work because she didn't want the conclusion to be hers alone. Same answer each time. Everything between Soldier Boy's ceiling and Homelander's was gone or compromised. The 7 was gutted. Godolkin was rubble. The secondary response network had degraded past functional use. What remained was a man who'd been frozen in a Russian facility for nearly 40 years and come back wrong in at least 3 documented ways, and probably more they hadn't gotten to yet. She'd called the DOD at 4 a.m. "I need Soldier Boy's current operational status." The liaison paused long enough that she checked the connection. "That's a significant ask, Ms. Barrett." "I know what it is. I also know what's moving toward New York. We'll need something in writing. You'll have it in 20 minutes. She'd started drafting before he finished the sentence. Homelander watched the transport footage on a secondary feed, arms crossed, holding his face in its default configuration with the deliberate effort of someone who knew he was being watched, even when no one was in the room. He hadn't been consulted about the Soldier Boy decision. Informed after the authorization cleared in a 4-minute call from Ashley that used the phrase, "best available option at this time." Twice, which he'd let pass both times because responding required saying something he wasn't ready to say out loud. The concern was not Soldier Boy specifically. The concern was what deploying Soldier Boy said about the gap between what this situation needed and what Homelander was currently positioned to provide. He didn't want that gap named. Ashley had named it anyway by making the call. He watched the transport pull into the loading bay. "He's going to get himself killed," he said. The aide in the corner had learned that statements delivered in that tone weren't requests for response. None. Soldier Boy got an 11-minute briefing he interrupted 4 times. Approach trajectory, estimated arrival, structural cover, sight lines from the catwalk, the 2 reinforced exits for outcomes requiring extraction. "Extraction," Soldier Boy said. "Standard protocol. You're briefing me on how to run away. In the event of, brief me on the target." The agent pulled up the Dallas footage. Soldier Boy watched it through once, without moving. Then watched the last 30 seconds again. "He walked away," he said. After the initial engagement with, "I'm not asking why." He walked away. He could have stayed. A beat. He wanted to. The agent had no prepared response for that reading. Soldier Boy stood. Operational suit, military green, worn the way things get worn when the wear is from use. Triangular shield on his left arm. He looked at the bay concrete deck, steel columns at intervals, catwalk at 20 feet, reinforced doors at both ends, sub-level hatch near the north wall. Everyone out? Protocol requires observation. I know what it requires. He didn't look at the agent. Out. They went. Battle Beast tracked the site the same way he'd tracked the shelf, not by investigation, but by the weight of the response surrounding it. Too many vehicles on roads that served nothing publicly visible. Overlapping satellite coverage. The electromagnetic signature of a building recently upgraded to absorb forces its original construction hadn't anticipated. He came from the south across open ground. The security perimeter outside had been set to delay, not stop. And they understood that distinction and executed it, and were still alive when he reached the main bay's exterior wall. He hit it. It gave him more resistance than expected. First interesting thing since the shelf. He hit it again. It moved. Third strike he went through. Dim inside. Emergency panels, only no full lighting, either damage from the breach or a deliberate call. Large space 60 feet across structural columns spaced through the interior catwalk, running the perimeter overhead 2 heavy doors at opposite ends. The deck had old processing stains. The air held decades of baked-in metal and concrete dust. Soldier Boy was standing in the middle of it. No cover, no angle. Just standing there with his shield arm up, looking at the hole in the wall. "Huh," he said. Battle Beast looked at him. Ran the same measure he'd run on the escorts, the combat instructor, the Class B at Frederick. Something in the read came back different. The way the man stood without making a performance of standing. The age in his face, and no apology anywhere in it. "They sent you out here to die," Battle Beast said. "Probably." Soldier Boy shifted his weight, not positioning, just the natural settle of a body getting ready. "You got a problem with that?" "No." "Good." He came forward. The first hit told them both something. Soldier Boy's punch landed across Battle Beast's shoulder and drove him 2 steps sideways. Not back sideways, a different vector, and the angle of it said something about how the force had been delivered that Battle Beast registered without thinking about it. Not the concentrated precision of Homelander's single shot in Dallas. Something raw, weight built up across a long time and thrown correctly. He returned with a horizontal mace arc. Soldier Boy got the shield up. The impact sent him back 4 feet and changed the geometry of the shield's face without collapsing it. 8 feet between them. Something in Battle Beast's attention changed that hadn't changed since Dallas. Not the fight itself, he'd been in fights. The body across from him. It knew what it was doing. He moved. What followed was not clean. 2 things built for damage operating in a space neither of them could fully use. Soldier Boy worked the columns, not for cover, for angle, using them to redirect after each collision, never holding still long enough to absorb a full committed strike. He wasn't fast. He was placed correctly, which in a space this size was worth more than speed. The mace caught him twice in the first 3 minutes, and both times he took it on the shield, let the shield handle what it could, and came back without the recovery pause that should have been there. The catwalk shed a section when a strike Soldier Boy slipped, sent the mace into a support column. Steel grating came down on the north end and added new terrain. Soldier Boy used it, got a line across the debris that Battle Beast had to step over, and in the step, threw a straight punch into Battle Beast's jaw. No technique. No combination set up. Just the punch thrown with everything behind it. Battle Beast's head moved. "Good," he said. Soldier Boy didn't answer. He was already moving. Reading the response the way an old fighter reads a response, not analytically, in the body. The accumulated knowledge of what happens after a hit, lands, and doesn't end things. Then the discharge. He drove it into the deck between them at close range, full output, and the concussive force went everywhere at once. The north door buckled. 2 columns cracked at their bases. The deck between them cratered 2 feet deep. Battle Beast went airborne, not far, but off the ground, which had happened to him twice since Dallas, and both times it had been Homelander. He came off the catwalk remnants immediately. Soldier Boy was on his knees. The discharge had cost him not badly. His body had decades of practice absorbing its own blowback. But his left arm was shaking in a way that meant the shield's next block was going to fail structurally. Battle Beast looked at him across the crater. "Again," he said. Soldier Boy got to his feet. Jaw set, arm still going. He looked at the crater, the cracked columns, the buckled door, then at Battle Beast. His expression wasn't calculation and wasn't hope. It was something underneath both of those. He came forward. Menton, the next 12 minutes ran one direction. Not cleanly. Soldier Boy made Battle Beast earn every step. He used the debris, the uneven deck around the crater, the smoke from the discharge still hanging in the upper part of the bay. He got 2 more hits in contact ranges, too tight for the mace, and they landed with the commitment of a man who has decided what he's willing to absorb and is not revising that decision. But the direction was clear to anyone reading it. Soldier Boy's timing was off by fractions and fractions. In this kind of fight are mathematics. The left arm was failing. He was compensating with his feet, and compensating well. But the gap between working around a problem and not having it was widening with each pass. Battle Beast saw it. He shifted the mace to redirect in the final 3 minutes rather than primary, using it to steer Soldier Boy's angle rather than end exchanges. It worked. A body trained to read space correctly reads correct spatial cues, even when those cues are being set by the other party. Soldier Boy moved where the geometry said to move. Battle Beast was making the geometry. The last collision was tight. Battle Beast came inside the shield's range and hit Soldier Boy twice. With his offhand, the mace was wrong at this distance, and he knew when it was wrong. The first hit broke something. The second took Soldier Boy's legs. He went down on the cratered deck face up. Battle Beast stood over him. "You stayed," he said. Soldier Boy looked up, face bloodied, left arm done. Whatever was moving across his expression didn't resolve into anything readable. "Yeah, well," he said. "Go to hell." Battle Beast looked at him for a moment, then stepped over him, picked up the mace from where it had landed, and walked south the way he'd come in. He didn't look back. Soldier Boy was breathing. That was enough. Dashas. The monitoring team had been running exterior audio and seismic sensors since the interior feeds died in the 3rd minute. Sound profile vibration record radiation spike from the discharge. When it went quiet, they sent 3 people in. They found a bay that looked like the inside of something that had been shaken hard, and Soldier Boy in the crater and nothing else. They called Ashley. She took the call in her car, 4 hours of sleep behind her tower ahead. Soldier Boy's alive. Sirius stable. Target left the site heading northeast. Northeast. Not away, not done. Toward the city. Toward the building she was driving toward. Toward the man at the top of it who had not been the one deployed today. Homelander Communications Team. Now not his floor, the team. I need a holding statement for the next hour. No retreat, no withdraw, no contained, no manageable. What should it say? She watched the highway. That Homelander is preparing a response. Make it sound like a choice he's making. Sensat. Butcher had been 6 miles out for 4 hours running intercepts through a DOD scanner. MM had liberated from a contact and never returned. He had the seismic data and the audio structure, not words the shape of the sound. Impacts, intervals. The change when the discharge went off. The shift after. 12 minutes, said. 11 and change. Best we've seen. Only thing in this country that's made it work. Butcher set the scanner down, which means Homelander isn't just the last card. He's what that card was always pointing at. He looked northeast through the post's narrow window. 48 hours, he said. We move in the next 48, or we move after, and after is a conversation I don't want to have. The tower. The tower. Phones came out, Butcher's starlights, across the room where she'd been on hers for 30 seconds already. Butcher didn't ask who she was calling. Behind them, the site was still settling. Metal cooling debris, finding its resting points, the quiet of a space where something very large had just finished and moved on. Northeast, at the same unhurried pace it had held since Dallas, one thing in this country had given it something worth carrying forward. The rest of the distance felt like nothing. Now just the gap between the beginning of a hunt and the end of it. He kept moving. The after-action summary on the Soldier Boy engagement ran 19 pages. Ashley read the executive portion 4 paragraphs, then the casualties and structural damage sections. The rest described in the measured language of people who had spent careers documenting things that could not be undone. What the main bay looked like when the monitoring team went in. She did not read that part. What the summary confirmed was that they had fielded the single most combat-capable entity available outside Homelander in a location prepared to give that entity every structural advantage, and the result had been 11 minutes of contact, followed by a northeast heading that had not deviated in the 8 hours since. She was in her office when the first update came in. Battle Beast had been located in Fairfield County, Connecticut, moving northeast, 40 miles per hour. Ground level. She pulled up the positioning map. 2 hours ago, Vought had moved a 6-person elite response unit to a logistics hub in Westchester. Priority rerouting heavy encryption 3 times the standard defensive concentration. Fairfield County was adjacent to Westchester. She stared at the map. Then she called Sage. Sage picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. The Westchester hub, Ashley said. Yes. It's going to hit the Westchester hub. It's going to hit wherever you stack the most, Sage said. You've been doing this for a week. The pattern is not ambiguous. Then tell me what to do with the Westchester hub. Pull the concentration, redistribute, make it look like everything else. A pause. Or leave it and accept that it will be hit within 6 hours, and the 6-person unit will not meaningfully change the result. Ashley looked at the map. If I pull it, I lose the hub. If I leave it, I lose the unit and the hub. Yes, that's not a real choice. No, Sage said. It isn't. She ended the call. Ashley looked at the map for another 30 seconds. Then she began issuing redistribution orders because the alternative was leaving 6 people in a building that was about to become a waypoint on someone else's route, and she had enough on her conscience without adding that. The redistribution generated 12 new data points of vehicular movement across the northeastern corridor. In Fairfield County, the heading adjusted 2 degrees. The Westchester hub lasted 4 minutes after Battle Beast arrived. Less than the Shelf, more than Knoxville. The 6-person unit fought in a compact line that showed professional discipline and had been briefed on the approach. It made no difference to the 4-minute number. All 6 survived, injuries ranging from serious to critical. That was unusual. The prior week's engagements had produced more permanent outcomes. Ashley logged it with the detachment of someone who has learned to record facts ahead of reactions, because reactions return, but facts slip. She did not annotate what it might mean that he was leaving more people breathing. She did not want to examine that data point closely enough to understand what it said about how he was calibrating the quality of what Vought kept sending against him. She pulled up the social monitoring feed instead and looked at the numbers, which were not better than the facts, but were at least a different category of bad. Homelander had a press appearance at 11. He landed on the steps of a federal building in Midtown at the speed broadcast cameras required, slow enough to read clearly, fast enough to register as power, and delivered 4 minutes of remarks about the extraterrestrial threat response, the strength of the American people, and his personal commitment to resolution in a manner consistent with the values this nation represented to the world. He said, "I am personally overseeing," twice. He said, "We will prevail," once at the end in the register. His handlers had calibrated for maximum resonance across the national audience. The press pool asked 7 questions. He answered 4, deflected 2, and did not hear the 7th because someone in his earpiece had started talking about Westchester. He held his expression for the remaining 30 seconds of coverage, thanked the press, and lifted off. In the air alone, he said 3 words not suitable for broadcast. Westchester Hub. 4 minutes. 6 people, none of them combat capable for the foreseeable future. And the heading had already adjusted. Already moving. Already done with Westchester the way it had been done with everything else. Not satisfied, not triumphant. Just finished and continuing. He had the same position data Ashley had. He had been watching the northeast course hold for 9 hours with the consistency of something that had decided on its endpoint and was not reconsidering. Extrapolated to conclusion that course ended at an island he lived on. He had known this for days. The knowing was not the problem. The problem was the gap between knowing and being able to do something about it. And the gap had been widening with every update that came in. He turned south and pushed toward the tower. The Deep was the name Vaught's tactical team put forward as the next available response option in the specific way that people put forward options they know are bad, because the alternative is admitting there are no good ones left. He was briefed at 1 p.m. on the 42nd floor. The deputy director conducting the briefing maintained eye contact throughout in the manner of someone who had decided professional dignity required facing bad news directly. The Deep listened. He looked at the approach course on the display. He looked at the Westchester footage. He looked at the Godolphin footage, which he had been avoiding for 3 days. "I want to go on record," he said, as having significant reservations about this. Noted, "I have unique capabilities in aquatic environments. This engagement is projected to occur in tri-state area, primarily urban and suburban terrain, which is not an aquatic environment." "No." He looked at the display again. "I want it noted that I raised this concern and it was overridden." "It's noted." He was sent to a highway interchange in northern New Jersey at 2:30 p.m. Part of a layered response that also included 2 Class B units, 1 Class C, and a tactical support team, because the numbers on a solo send had not been encouraging. Battle Beast reached the interchange at 4:17 p.m. The engagement lasted 6 minutes. The Deep survived. This was the objective he had identified as primary. And in that specific sense, the operation was a success. He was in a Vought medical transport by 5 p.m., which meant he missed the civilian footage going live 14 separate angles from devices across the interchange area, distributed faster than Vaught's moderation architecture could process. Dawn, Ashley watched the spread numbers climb from her office. The Deep interchange footage hit 3 times the Dallas viral volume inside 90 minutes. Partly because Dallas had been catchable from a controlled number of angles, and this had been 14 simultaneous. The comment sentiment analysis had shifted. Dallas, through the Soldier Boy engagement, had run roughly even half the country reading it as an extraterrestrial attack, being managed the other half reading it as something Homelander was failing at. Current spread 62 to 38, and the 38 were the ones who still thought management was occurring. She opened a document, typed 2 sentences, deleted them, typed them slightly differently, deleted them again. The problem was structural, not compositional. Every frame she had built this week assumed a degree of operational control that was no longer present in the underlying reality. You could bridge the gap between narrative and fact for a while. You could not bridge a gap the audience was now filming from 14 directions. She called Homelander's floor and told them she needed 15 minutes. He was at the west-facing windows when she arrived, looking at the city below. He did not turn. She set her tablet on the table. Northern New Jersey, moving southeast. Consistent pace since the interchange. He said nothing. The course puts it at a Hudson crossing somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. Could be sooner if it goes cross-country instead of following the interstate density. I know where it's going. Yes. She kept her voice level. The question is what we put between here and there. What do we have left? She had prepared for this. She had prepared for it the way you prepare to deliver news you know will land badly, by organizing the facts clearly and saying them without softening, because softening only delays the landing. Below your Tier 8 soup-rated operatives not yet fielded. 3 Class B, 5 Class C. 1 independent contractor who stopped returning calls after Godolkin. Soldier Boy is in recovery, timeline unknown. The Deep is en route to our medical facility. That's it? That's what's available. The word available sat in the room. She had chosen it deliberately over the word she had almost used, which was inventory, because inventory was the word that would have made the silence harder. I can spread the remaining 8 across 3 or 4 points, she said. Buys a few hours. Given the current attrition rate, it also likely produces serious casualties. Homelander turned from the window. His face held the surface stillness she had learned to read, the controlled exterior of something not still underneath. What does Sage say? Sage hasn't responded since this morning. A beat. What do you recommend? She had not expected that question. In 4 years, he had asked it approximately 3 times each time, in a context that made it rhetorical. This was not rhetorical. Stop sending people between here and there, she said. Consolidate everything at the tower. Fortify what can be fortified. Prepare for direct engagement on ground we've chosen. Long silence. And you're recommending I handle the direct engagement. You're the only variable that changes the result. He looked at her. She held it. Harden the tower, he said. Everything internal. No more external sends. He turned back to the window. Position update every 30 minutes. She picked up her tablet. Ashley? She stopped. The press statement. It says I'm preparing a response. Yes. Make sure it sounds like I chose this. She left without answering, because the answer he needed and the answer that was accurate were not the same answer, and she had been delivering the one he needed for long enough that the line between them had stopped feeling as distinct as it once had. Butcher was at a rest stop off the Garden State Parkway, 40 minutes south of the interchange, when the civilian footage started going wide. Laptop open to the feeds, MM's seismic scanner on the tablet beside it, coffee gone cold 2 hours ago. He had also, in the past 4 hours, made 2 calls and sent 1 encrypted message that he had not mentioned to MM or Huey. The first call, a DoD source, with access to Vaught's internal communication routing. He'd asked which channels the tower's security coordination was using since Soldier Boy. The second call, a former Vought logistics contractor who owed him and whose expertise was facility access under high-security lockdown. The message, someone he hadn't contacted in 3 years, whose specific skill set had not been relevant until about 72 hours ago. He hadn't told MM because would have asked what he was building, and what he was building wasn't far enough along to survive a full explanation. It adjusted, Huey said, looking at his phone. Southeast now. Was northeast an hour ago. Vought pulled the external units, Butcher said. Consolidated inward? How do you know that? Because that's what Sage would tell them, and because the course shift started at exactly the same time Ashley Barrett went dark on public channels and started moving internal. He looked at the tracking update. Nothing left outside the tower worth following. Huey was quiet. So it's going to the tower. We're all going to the tower. Butcher picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, put it back down. Question is whether we're there in time to be useful or in time to watch. He looked at the map. The position markers formed a line clean direct each point a few miles closer to the skyline at the screen's edge. The system had spent a week building walls. Each wall had cost something people infrastructure credibility hours. The walls were gone or going. What remained was the center, and the center had always been where this ended, and everyone in it had known that for days. The only open question was what happened once they were all inside it together. Butcher had some thoughts. He started the car and pulled back onto the highway, heading north. Butcher made 3 moves in the 6 hours between the Garden State Parkway and the Holland Tunnel. The first was a data drop. The DoD routing contact had given him access to Vaught's internal logistics traffic. Not the secure channels, those were locked, but the scheduling metadata that moved alongside them. Enough to map which physical locations were sending and receiving elevated traffic volumes since the tower consolidation order. Butcher took 4 of those locations and dropped their coordinates to 2 different investigative journalists he had been cultivating for 18 months, with enough supporting documentation to make the locations verifiable, but not enough to trace back to the origin of the drop. Both stories went live within the hour. Different outlets, different angles, different frames. One ran it as public safety, one ran it as accountability. Both ran it with the addresses. The second move, a former Vought contractor whose expertise was logistics routing, called in a specific favor. He rerouted 2 Vought armored transport vehicles that had been heading for the tower's secure loading bay along an alternate corridor, a longer route through a section of northern Jersey that was currently receiving heavy civilian emergency traffic from the interchange aftermath. The reroute was plausible. The corridor was real. The effect was that 2 vehicles carrying Vought data backups and 3 high-value personnel were now moving through a zone that was based on current tracking approximately 40 minutes ahead of Battle Beast's projected path. The third move he didn't tell anyone about at all. Now, found out about the first move from a news alert on his phone. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Butcher, who was driving and not looking back. Those locations, said. Yes. You gave those to press. Technically, I gave them to 2 separate press outlets with different editorial perspectives, which produces a more complete coverage picture. Billy, people needed to know those sites existed. People. Set his phone down on the center console face up. Which people? The people in the blast radius when Battle Beast goes through whichever one it reads as high value next. Because that's the people who just got told exactly where to go if they want footage. Butcher said nothing. Those addresses are out there now. Vought has to react publicly, which means they move resources to manage the optics, which means they add signal to exactly the locations they were trying to go quiet. Turned to face him directly. You mapped the pressure points and handed them to the thing that follows pressure. That's a way to describe it. Is there a different way? Butcher was quiet for a moment. There's a way where 3 warehouses full of compound V data and 4 years of test subject files get torched or buried before anyone who matters can look at them. because Vought gets their logistics in order before Battle Beast gets there. The way I did it, those files are in play. He checked the side mirror. Some of them are already on the journalist's servers. Looked out the window. They were crossing into the outer boroughs, the skyline ahead of them, catching the last of the afternoon light. There were civilian residential blocks within 600 meters of one of those sites, said. I know. And Vought put those coordinates in a residential area because they knew that made them harder to hit cleanly. Butcher's jaw tightened. I didn't put them there. I just stopped letting Vought use the neighborhood as cover. The car was quiet for a long time. That's going to be the argument, said finally, right up until someone who lives on that block gets killed. And then it'll still be the argument, just harder to make. Butcher didn't answer that. Tag. Starlight called Huey from a secondary position 3 blocks north of one of the released locations. She had gotten there ahead of the press and well ahead of any Vought coverage units. And she had been watching the building an ordinary commercial warehouse in a section of industrial Brooklyn, surrounded by other ordinary commercial warehouses and a parking structure and a deli that had been open since 6 a.m. This whole block is going to become a problem, she said. I know. The deli has people in it. The parking structure has people in it. If Battle Beast tracks here before Vought can clear the area. I know, Annie. Huey. I know, I heard you. I know. A pause. Billy thinks the files inside justify. That's not actually what I called to debate. Her voice was level. I called because I'm here, and I can try to move civilians if we have a window. I need to know if we have a window or if I'm going to be mid-evacuation when it arrives. We don't have reliable tracking. Last confirmed was 40 minutes ago. So I don't know. No. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me when you have something. She stayed on the corner and watched the deli and tried not to think about the fact that she was doing triage calculations on a residential block because Butcher had decided that the files in that warehouse were worth the exposure. She had agreed with his reasoning about the files. She had not agreed with his method. She was not sure those were separable things, and not being sure about that was the part that was actually bothering her. The Vought facility that Battle Beast reached at 6:40 p.m. was not one of the addresses that had gone live. It was a data processing and storage node 2 miles east of the released locations, moving significant network traffic since the tower drawdown order, and surrounded by a security concentration 3 times heavier than anything in its public classification justified. The live addresses had pulled Vought's rapid reaction units toward the west, covering those sites. The node had 4 operators and 1 Class C soupy who managed 8 minutes. Inside server racks, backup drives the physical infrastructure of a logging system that had been running for 11 years. Biological data, financial transfers, correspondence between Vought's medical division and 17 individuals whose names appeared on no public record, but whose compensation packages logged here were the kind of numbers that appear when institutions are paying for silence. He did not read any of it. He put the mace through the server racks in 2 passes, pushed through the backup storage in 1 more, and left. The network traffic downstream from the hub dropped to 0 within 60 seconds of the first strike. 3 data pipelines that had been running continuous transfers to the tower's secure intake went dark. The tower's intake system registered the drops. Ashley registered the drops 30 seconds after that. 3 simultaneous from, she said. She was in the tower's crisis operations center, which was now the only operations center that mattered. Eastern Grid data layer. The node is gone. It wasn't on the list that went out, said the deputy director. No, it wasn't. She pulled up the network map. The gaps in the data pipeline were visible in real time, 3 gray lines where active connections had been. The released locations pulled our teams west. The node was east. The deputy director was looking at the map. So the addresses were a redirect. She said it flatly. Someone dropped locations to move our coverage, and then the actual target was somewhere else. She zoomed in on the node's location and the team positioning. The geometry was obvious once you looked for it. This wasn't a leak. This was a maneuver. She pulled up the timeline of the data drop and cross-referenced it against the tracking updates from the past 6 hours. The drop had gone live at 2:18 p.m. The team repositioning had been authorized at 2:47 p.m. The node's network traffic had spiked at 3:05 p.m., additional data being pushed toward the tower as the pullback accelerated. Someone had known that accelerating the pullback would spike the node signal. Someone had known that spiking the node signal would make it more visible. And someone had known which direction to push Vaught's teams to leave the node exposed. She picked up her phone and called Sage. Sage picked up on the first ring. "The node," Ashley said. "Yes." "You saw it?" "I saw the traffic pattern change at 3 p.m. I saw what the change implied." A pause. "Someone with access to our logistics metadata and an understanding of how our protocols work used the press drop to create a coverage gap." "Who?" "Someone who has been watching us long enough to understand that we move toward visibility, and who knew the node would compensate for the gap by accelerating data transfer, making it a more prominent mark." Another pause. "Not many people understand our internal protocols at that granularity." "Butcher." Sage was quiet for a moment. "That would be a reasonable inference." "Can you confirm it?" "No. I can tell you the move was too precisely calibrated to be accidental and too specific to our internal structure to be a lucky guess. Beyond that, you're inferring." "What do I do with that?" "Nothing useful," Sage said. "By the time you confirm it and act on it, the next move will already have happened." She ended the call. Ashley set her phone down and looked at the network map for a long time. 3 gray lines. 7 active pipelines still running. 11 that had gone dark in the past 36 hours. She opened a new document and sat in front of it. She had spent a week writing statements about things she couldn't fully control. What she was looking at now wasn't a statement problem. It was a problem of what you do when you realize what's chasing you and what's nudging your reactions toward it might be operating in concert, and you are inside the structure they're both pushing toward. She closed the document and opened the tower. Hardening status report instead, because that was something she could actually affect, and affecting something was better than sitting with the alternative. No, Homelander reviewed the evening briefing alone. 7 data points, 3 infrastructure losses, 2 confirmed civilian injuries from the team repositioning a traffic incident 2 blocks from the Vought staging area, nothing to do with Battle Beast, entirely to do with the speed at which the vehicles had been moving. When the reroute order came in, the injuries were minor. The incident had been recorded on 7 phones and was currently being processed by the same media ecosystem that had been processing everything else. He looked at the summary for a long time. What he was sitting with was not the damage numbers. The damage numbers were abstract. What was not abstract was the shape of the evening's pattern, the sense that the decisions being made around him, Vaught's decisions, his team's decisions, the decisions that were technically made in service of his protection, were being anticipated. Fed on, used. He had spent his entire operational life as the center that other people planned around. Every defensive posture, every PR strategy, every institutional calculation ran through him. Now, he was still at the center. But the center had become a destination rather than a position of strength, and the distinction was not subtle. Something outside was driving toward him. Something inside was making it easier. He didn't know yet who inside. He suspected several possibilities, but had not acted on any of them because acting required certainty he didn't have, and certainty required information that people were apparently no longer moving freely in his direction. He sat with that for a moment. The city below the window was lit and ordinary and indifferent to what was 6 miles south of it and closing. Then he called Ashley. "The traffic incident," he said when she picked up. "Handled. Both injured parties have been contacted by our liaison team. Compensation packages are being arranged. The footage is..." "I'm not calling about the footage." A pause. "Okay. The reroute that caused the incident. Who authorized it?" "The tactical coordination team based on the location drop reaction protocol." "And the locations came from?" "We're still working on attribution." "You said maneuver. In the ops center, I was watching the room feed." A silence. "You said someone maneuvered us." "Yes." "And you think it's Butcher?" She did not answer immediately. He waited. "I think," she said carefully, "that someone with a detailed understanding of our operational patterns used publicly available channels to affect our positioning. And I think you should know that I'm continuing to look into it." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It isn't. A beat. But it's what I have right now." He ended the call and sat in the briefing room alone with the damage summary and the network map and the tracking update 6 miles out southeast, consistent pace, and the clear sense of a man in a room that is getting smaller in every direction that matters. Butcher got to the tower's outer perimeter 3 hours before Battle Beast did. He had MMM with him. He did not have Starlight, who had stayed in Brooklyn until she confirmed the civilians on the block had moved. The deli had closed early. The parking structure had been cleared on the pretense of a gas main concern that Huey had called in through a city infrastructure tip line. She joined them 2 hours later in the parking structure across the street from the tower's service entrance, and she did not say anything about the coordinate drop when she arrived. She also did not look at Butcher in the way she usually did, which said more. 3 data pipelines still active to the tower, Butcher said, looking at the schematic on his laptop. The hardening has been running since Ashley's order. Interior position stacked, exterior perimeter fortified. Sight, he zoomed in on the service entrance. The pullback is exactly what we needed it to be. What we needed it to be, MM said. For it to be worth going in. What we needed it to be. MM looked at him steadily. Billy, I want you to say out loud what you did today. I redirected Vaught's coverage and exposed a data node. 2 people got hurt because your redirect sent armored vehicles through a civilian intersection at speed. Minor injuries? Today. Tonight it might be something else. Tomorrow. MM did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice for the arguments that mattered. You're not steering this anymore. You're feeding a fire and calling it a strategy. And if I don't feed it, Vought buries those files and walks out of this the same as they walked in, Butcher said. With Homelander and the whole machine intact, and everything that's in that building still buried. And if you do feed it and civilians get killed, then that happened? Butcher looked at the schematic. It happened in Knoxville too, and Frederick. And every Vought convoy I didn't redirect that also drove through civilian areas. The only difference is, this time I made a choice about it instead of pretending I didn't have one. MM was quiet for a long time. Huey in the corner of the parking structure had not said anything since they arrived. He was looking at his hands. Starlight was at the window watching the tower's service entrance. After a long moment, she said, "Is there anyone still inside the tower who doesn't deserve to be there?" Nobody answered that. "Because that's what I'm thinking about," she said. "That's the question for tonight." Butcher looked at the schematic. He did not look at Starlight. "There are people in that building who chose to be there," he said. "And there are files in that building that have to come out. And there is one man at the top of that building who has to be stopped." He closed the laptop. "I'm going to do all three things tonight. The sequence will be ugly. It will probably cost something I'll have to live with." He looked up. That's what tonight is. Nobody argued with him. Nobody agreed either. The tower's upper floors were lit against the darkening sky outside. Somewhere below street level, the position update would be pinging every 30 minutes on Ashley's phone, and somewhere south of the city moving at the same unhurried pace it had held for 10 days. The last and largest piece of the night's geometry was closing the remaining distance. Butcher had pushed everything toward this point. He was not certain it would be enough. He was certain he was going to find out. The tower had been designed to be seen from a distance. 64 levels of glass and steel on the Midtown skyline, the Vought logo backlit in white at the summit, visible on clear nights from the outer boroughs and from the New Jersey side of the river and from the air if you were coming in low enough. The architect had described it at the unveiling as a monument to American ambition. The marketing team had described it as a statement of permanence. It had been a statement of permanence for 23 years. At 9:14 p.m., the external lighting system was still running. The logo was still lit. The lobby, visible through 40 feet of ground-level glass, still had its reception desk and its security station and its walls of polished stone with the Vought seal inlaid at the center. From the street, it looked exactly like a place that was fully operational and under complete control. From inside, it looked like something that had been told exactly what was coming and had run out of ways to prepare. Ashley had moved her operations to the 41st level 2 hours ago because the crisis center on 38 was too close to the lobby. And she had wanted elevation, and because on 41 there were windows on 3 sides, and she could see the street below in 4 directions, and she needed to see the street. She had a laptop, a satellite phone, a tablet running the network map, and 3 people who had been with her long enough to understand that when she went quiet, it meant she was thinking, and not that she was available for questions. The hardening order had been executed. Blast positions on the stairwells at levels 8, 20, 32, 48, and 56. Security teams at each post, not the public-facing team from the lobby. Those had been stood down, but the internal tier, the people whose names did not appear on the company's public staff directory. Thermal deterrent systems on levels 15 through 22. A kill corridor configuration on 30 through 35 that Homelander had authorized at 8 p.m., which Ashley had not questioned, because questioning it would have required her to say out loud what it implied about how disposable the people who worked on those levels were being treated. She had not questioned it. Social monitoring, she said. One of the 3 people pulled it up. The feeds were live. Cameras on the street outside the tower's base had been capturing for the past 40 minutes as people gathered on the perimeter. Not a protest, not a crowd in any organized sense, just the accumulation of individuals who had followed the tracking feeds and the civilian footage and had made their way to the place where everything was pointing. 14 streams live from the street. 82,000 concurrent viewers on the largest one. Any footage from inside yet? Nothing confirmed from inside. When that changes flag it immediately. She looked at the network map. 4 data pipelines still active. 3 had gone dark in the Jersey sequence. We have 40 minutes of complete transfer capacity left on the Eastern backup system. After that, we're on local storage only. Should I prioritize which files? The medical division archives first. Then the financial correspondence from the shelf oversight chain. Then everything in the Godolkin incident documentation going back 4 years. She did not look up from the laptop. Everything else is secondary. The person did not ask what secondary meant. Sage was on the 53rd level, in a room she had specifically requested have no internal surveillance, which had been granted because requesting a room with no surveillance was the kind of thing that only made people nervous if they had something to lose. She had a single display, running the tower's internal sensor grid temperature pressure, seismic electrical load by level. It was a better map of what was happening inside than any camera system, because cameras showed you what someone had pointed them at, and sensor grids showed you physics. She watched the ground-level sensors begin to register at 9:22 p.m. The readings were distinctive, not the distributed vibration of street traffic or the structure's own mechanical systems. Localized, heavy, rhythmic in the specific way that something bipedal and very large, moving at a deliberate pace, is rhythmic. She noted the entry point, the north service access, which bypassed the lobby entirely, which meant he had gone around the 40 feet of ground-level glass, and the polished stone and the vault seal, and come in through the part of the tower that handled deliveries and maintenance and the movement of things that weren't meant to be seen from the street. She watched the sensor readings begin their climb level by level. Then she picked up her satellite phone and made one call. The lobby security team on the ground level had been pulled back behind the blast position at level 8 when the tower went to lockdown. What remained in the lobby were the physical fixtures of normal operations, the desk, the seating area, the information screens cycling through Vought's current brand, messaging the polished floor, and the 2 members of the internal tier who had drawn the assignment of holding the lobby perimeter. They heard him before the door came in. The service access door was rated for forced entry up to a threshold that accounted for the strongest documented human capability, plus a safety margin. The door lasted approximately 8 seconds. Then he was in the lobby. He stood in the entrance and looked at it. The information screens were still cycling. One was showing a graphic of the Vought logo with the tagline, "Protecting What Matters." Another was showing footage of Homelander at the press appearance from earlier in the day. The steps of the federal building, the measured cadence, the expression calibrated for maximum resonance. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at the 2 members of the internal tier. They held their positions. Credit to them, they held their positions. The exchange that followed lasted about 45 seconds. Both of them were breathing when it ended. The Homelander footage was still playing on the screen above the wreckage of the security desk. The lobby was a different shape than it had been before he entered. He walked to the stairs. The blast position at level 8 was the first real resistance. 6 people soup-rated gear thermal overlay systems that the facility architects had specified for exactly this kind of vertical combat scenario. They had the choke point, the landing, and they had the equipment, and they had been briefed, and they held it for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, which was longer than the lobby and shorter than Westchester. Battle Beast worked differently in the stairwell than he had in any open space. The geometry was brutal and close, 2 people wide. Ceiling 7 feet above the landing, nowhere to redirect and nowhere to absorb impact. That wasn't also a wall. He used the mace against the blockade structure rather than against people where he could, finding the mounting points, the load-bearing elements, the places where the architecture was doing the work of resistance rather than the people. When the line came down, it came down as a unit, and the people on it went with it into the level 8 passage in a way that was damaging but not final. And he stepped through the gap and continued up. Level 8 was the tower's media production suite, the studio space where Homelander's public appearances were scripted and rehearsed, where crisis footage was edited, where the lighting rigs and prompter systems and green screen infrastructure of 2 decades of manufactured narrative lived. He walked through it. The screens were still lit. Some had scripts on them. One had a series of prepared responses to questions about the current situation, each one tagged with the name of the interviewer who was expected to ask it. He did not read them. He put the mace through the server stack in the center of the room that ran the broadcast architecture, and then he moved to the stairs. Ashley registered the media production suite going offline at 9:34 p.m. She sat with that for a moment. The suite was not a system she had thought of as a vulnerability. It was a production asset, not a data asset, not something with protected files. But the server stack there had contained 18 months of prepared messaging, crisis response trees, approved narrative frameworks, and the indexing system that connected Vaught's public-facing messaging to its internal documentation. With the stack gone, there was no longer a synchronized connection between what Vaught said publicly and what it had on record internally. The 2 systems would now run in parallel, uncoupled each one, accumulating divergence from the other with every hour that passed. She made a note of it and kept working. 3 levels above the media suite, the kill corridor was active. She did not pull up the feed from 30 through 35. She had helped design the kill corridor door configuration, and she understood what it was designed to do, and she did not need to watch it do it. She tracked it by the sensor data, and by the damage reports that came in at intervals, and by the fact that the readings continued upward rather than stopping, which told her what she needed to know about the kill corridor's effectiveness. At 9:51 p.m., the data server cluster on level 39 went silent. The servers on 39 had held, among other things, the financial architecture of Vaught's relationship with 12 sitting members of Congress, 3 former cabinet secretaries, and a federal judge whose confirmation hearing 6 years ago had been managed in part by documentation that now no longer existed in any system Vaught controlled. She opened the file transfer status. The medical division archives had completed. The financial correspondence was at 71%. The Godolkin documentation was queued. 42% of total priority archive completed before 39 went silent. 58% was now inaccessible. She closed the transfer status and did not open it again. Homelander was on the 58th level. He had been moving between levels since the lobby breach, not running, not hiding, but moving because staying in one location meant the sensor grid would give away his position, and he did not yet want his position known. He wanted Battle Beast to come to him on terms he had chosen in a space he had prepared at a moment he controlled. The problem was that the tower was losing terms faster than he could set new ones. Level 39, silent. The kill corridor had not held. The thermal systems had produced 2 levels of genuine delay. He had watched the sensor readings go irregular there, the pace slowing, the vibration pattern changing in ways that suggested the deterrent had at least made things uncomfortable. But uncomfortable was not stopped, and stopped was what he needed. He had 6 people with him on 58, the 5 remaining members of the internal tier who had not been assigned below, plus an aide who had refused to leave and whom he had not forced to leave because he did not want to be alone up here, with the readings doing what they were doing. Level 48, said the security lead. The position is engaged. How long? At current pace, we're estimating 8 to 12 minutes. 8 to 12 minutes was not enough time to do anything useful with. It was enough time to watch something approach. He walked to the window. The street below had more people on it than it had an hour ago. Some of them had phones up. Some of them were just standing there. The Vaught logo was still lit above him, white against the dark sky. The cameras on this level, he said, live. 7 networks and 14 civilian streams have been pulling from the exterior feeds. Not the exterior, internal. A pause. Level 39 interior went silent when the servers went. Everything below that we lost in the kill corridor sequence. We have inside coverage on 48 through 60. When he comes through 48's position, I want every interior camera in this building broadcasting. The security lead looked at him. Sir, if we open the inside feeds, we lose control of the... I know what we lose. He turned from the window. I want 47 million people watching when I put this thing down. The security lead nodded and began making the necessary calls. Butcher was in the tower's data infrastructure sublevel, which occupied a section of basement connecting to a maintenance corridor running the north side. The sublevel was not on the public architectural plans. It had been on the proprietary schematics that his DoD routing contact had provided, along with the access codes for the maintenance corridor, which his logistics contractor contact had verified were still active despite the lockdown. He had MM with him. He did not have Starlight, who had taken a separate access point to the executive-level stairwell, with a specific objective that Butcher had briefed her on, and that she had not been happy about, but had accepted. Primary relay is here, MM said, looking at the sublevel map on his tablet. Secondary backup is 40 feet east. Take the secondary, I'll take the primary. Butcher looked at the relay housing. We pull both the towers' internal communication architecture goes to local only, no external coordination capability. That also means no external help for anyone still inside who needs it. Yes. MM looked at him. There are Vought security personnel in here who are about to be in a situation with no external coordination, MM said. Some of them are going to die in the next hour regardless. Some of them might not, if they could reach outside support. I know. And? Butcher looked at the relay housing for a moment. Then, he looked at MM. If we leave it running, Vought coordinates a containment. The tower survives intact. Files get locked down. Tonight ends with this place standing and everything in it still buried. He picked up the tools. I know what I'm asking. MM held his gaze for a long time. Then he walked 40 feet east and started working on the secondary relay. The blast position on level 48 held 11 minutes. The internal tier assigned to it, 4 people the best gear Tobias van Geervot had, held it for 11 minutes in the shaft, and the sensor data showed it clearly slower progress. Irregular rhythm evidence of a genuine exchange rather than a systematic reduction. One of the 4 was not moving when the position finally came through. 3 were. Battle Beast came through into the 48th level and stopped. This level was Vought's Executive Services Zone, the transition between the working sections below and the restricted territory above. It was furnished differently than everything beneath it. The carpet was different. The lighting was different. The air smelled different, scrubbed and temperature-controlled in a way that the lower levels were not. There were no people in the hall. The level had been evacuated before the lockdown. He walked it slowly. The offices here had the names of people on the doors, not positions' names. This was the zone where individuals were important enough to be identified by who they were rather than what function they performed. The carpet was clean. The plants were real, not synthetic. A small sculpture on a pedestal near the elevator bank had a plaque that said it had been given to Vought International by a foreign head of state in recognition of partnership in regional security cooperation. He looked at it for a moment. Then he hit it with the mace and kept walking. The stairs above 48 were unblocked. The decision had been made somewhere in the tower's command structure to stop staging positions and consolidate what remained. He went up. Level 53. The room Sage had been using was empty when he reached it. The display was still running the tower's internal sensor grid, showing him as a warm signature in motion on the map. Everything below him already shifted to gray. He looked at the display for a moment, at the map, at the levels he had come through. He was not thinking about what those levels represented. He was not thinking about Compound 5, or dead children, or 12 years of blackmail files, or the kill corridor, or the sculpture from the foreign head of state. He was thinking about the gradient, about how the weight of the defense had changed as he climbed, about how each level had given way differently, and what the difference told him about what was above. What was above was lighter now. Fewer people, fewer layers. The stairs above 53 were open, and somewhere in the tower above him, one very specific thermal signature moving. Not hiding, waiting. He went up. Tank. Ashley registered the inside cameras going live on levels 48 through 60 at 10:09 p.m. She stared at her display for a moment. "He's broadcasting inside footage," she said. The person next to her confirmed it. She thought about what that meant. Homelander had switched on internal coverage voluntarily. He had decided that 47 million people watching was an advantage that being seen mattered enough to override the loss of control that came with open access. It was in its way the most Homelander decision she had seen him make in 4 years. The instinct that when you can't control an outcome, you control the narrative around it. The belief that being watched was the same as being powerful. She looked at the social numbers. The viewer count on the largest civilian stream outside the tower had just crossed 96,000. She looked at the live inside footage. Level 56, passage empty, lit, no movement. Level 57, the same. Level 58. Homelander standing at the window looking down at the street, the city lit below him, the logo above him. And in the feed between 55 and 56, a movement. A shape. Large, unhurried, taking the stairs one at a time with the patience of something that had already decided the distance was nothing. The cameras were running on 7 networks. What was on that stairwell feed was about to be on all of them. Ashley looked at the footage for a long moment. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her satellite phone, and walked to the window of level 41 to watch the street below. Because whatever happened in the next few minutes was going to happen whether she watched it on a screen or not. And she found that she could not make herself watch it on a screen. The city outside was bright and ordinary, and completely unaware of what was 2 levels above her and closing. She waited. The 58th level was still lit when Battle Beast came through the stairwell door. Homelander was waiting in the center of the room, not at the window anymore. He had sent the aide and the security lead out 10 minutes ago. Sent them out, not ordered them to fight, because he had looked at both of them and understood that what was coming through that door was something they would only make worse by being present. He stood alone in the room with the city spread behind him, through the glass, all of it lit, all of it ordinary, 80 million people who did not know yet. He looked at Battle Beast. Battle Beast looked at him. "I've been watching you work your way up," Homelander said. His voice was steady. He had worked very hard on keeping it steady. "I figured you deserved the real thing eventually." Battle Beast said nothing. He was doing what he had done since Dallas, measuring. Reading. The man across from him was large, by human standards, physically imposing, with the kind of presence that came from 2 decades of being treated like the most dangerous thing in any room. None of that was wrong. The power was real. The capability was real. But the man had been standing in this room for 20 minutes, waiting for Battle Beast to arrive, and waiting was not something a chieftain did when an enemy was coming. A chieftain met the enemy on the way. Homelander crossed the room in a fraction of a second. The first 3 exchanges were fast and brutal and told Battle Beast most of what he needed to know. Homelander's speed was genuine, faster than anything else in this world. Except possibly himself at full extension and in closed space, that kind of speed was a weapon of its own. The first strike caught Battle Beast across the left shoulder, before he had fully rotated to meet it, and the force was significant. Not like Soldier Boy's accumulated weight, but concentrated, precise, the product of a body that had spent years refining the delivery of maximum force through minimum contact surface. Battle Beast went back 4 steps. Homelander followed immediately, which was correct tactically, and drove another strike at the same shoulder, trying to compound the damage. Battle Beast caught the second on a crossed guard and shunted it wide. The third came from the other direction, and he took it on the chest, let the force move him, used the movement to change his angle. Then he hit Homelander. Not the mace too slow for this distance. His right hand, open palm strike to the sternum, driven from his center. The impact sent Homelander through the conference table and into the far wall, which developed a Homelander-shaped depression in the drywall before the studs gave way, and the far wall became 2 sections of wall. Homelander came out of the wreckage, already accelerating. The east-facing window ceased to exist when they moved through it. The fight went vertical almost immediately, which was where Homelander had intended it to go. He was faster in open air, more dangerous at distance, and had spent his entire operational life treating altitude as a tactical advantage that belonged to him exclusively. Battle Beast did not fly. He fell. When Homelander drove him downward and caught the tower's exterior face 4 levels below the breach, his hands finding purchase in the glass and steel panel, the panel failing but slowing the descent. He dropped off the facade 20 feet above the roof of an adjacent structure, landed on it, and was moving before Homelander could use the altitude gap. The beam came down like a line of fire between them. 40 feet of rooftop material turned to liquid and then to vapor in under a second. Homelander held it tracking toward Battle Beast's position, not aiming directly, cutting his line of approach, making the ground between them impassable. Battle Beast read it. He went sideways along the adjacent roof's edge, using the parapet as a path, staying ahead of the tracking speed by a margin that was smaller than comfortable. The output cut through the parapet behind him in sections, each section dropping to the street far below. From the street, 97,000 people on live streams watched a line of fire cut across the midtown skyline. Homelander dropped fast and hard, trying to close the gap before Battle Beast could use the rooftop as a reset. He was 3 feet away when Battle Beast reversed direction and drove into him rather than continuing to retreat. The collision was not clean. It was the specific messiness of 2 large objects colliding when neither of them was intending to absorb the impact gracefully. They went through the parapet section that was still intact and into open air, and for several seconds, neither of them was in contact with anything solid. Battle Beast got his hands on Homelander's left arm during the fall. What happened to Homelander's left arm after that was the kind of information that would appear in the damage assessment reports, but not in the version of events that anyone would try to make public. They landed on the tower's service terrace, 12 levels down. Homelander was on his feet in a second left arm held differently than the right. Not broken, his physiology did not permit simple fractures, but the joint had been torqued in a direction the joint had not been torqued before, and the nerve response in the arm was doing something that felt unfamiliar and unwelcome. He fired again, wide aperture this time, using it as area denial rather than a targeted weapon. The terrace became a field of superheat. The physical infrastructure ducts, cooling units, antenna mounts melted in seconds. Battle Beast stood in the middle of it. He was not unaffected. The heat was real. His armor was dark in the areas of sustained exposure, and the exposed areas around the neck and jaw showed the kind of redness that on a human would have been catastrophic. He stood in it and breathed through it, and looked at Homelander across the field of liquid metal and glowing material with a quality of focus that came from something that had made a decision and was executing it. "Is that all you've got?" Homelander said. His voice was no longer as steady as it had been in the room. Battle Beast said nothing. He walked into the heat field. Homelander hit him with full output at close range. The force moved Battle Beast back, not off his feet but back 1 meter too, the armor surface on his chest going dark. He stopped moving backward. He was still advancing. Homelander pulled back, trying to regain vertical space. Battle Beast caught his ankle. The next 30 seconds were the most honest 30 seconds Homelander had experienced in 20 years. He had spent 2 decades being the most powerful thing in every room, on every rooftop, in every encounter. That had produced a particular kind of combat style, aggressive, spectacular, built on the assumption that he could do whatever he wanted to the person in front of him, and the person in front of him could not do the same to him. It had worked every single time. It was not working now. Battle Beast's style was different in ways that Homelander was only now processing at the level of his body rather than his conscious mind. It was not faster. It was not necessarily more powerful at any given point of exchange. What it was patient in a way that a body that has fought across multiple star systems develops patience, the willingness to absorb a hit in order to control the response to the hit, to take ground in exchange for reading, to never commit fully until the reading confirmed the commitment. Homelander hit him with everything he had, and Battle Beast ate it and hit him back. And Homelander moved, and Battle Beast read the movement and adjusted and hit him again. And this process had been running for 11 minutes, and the asymmetry in it was becoming undeniable. He went fast, genuine, top speed, the kind he used when he needed to end something in under a second. Out of the approach from above and behind the strike, he landed on the back of Battle Beast's shoulder, drove them both through the terrace surface and into the level below. A maintenance deck. Pipes, conduits, the mechanical intestines of a large structure doing the work of keeping its upper levels habitable. Close, dark. The overhead gone, because they'd punched through it. Battle Beast stood up from the impact crater. Homelander understood in the 3 seconds it took him to stand that he had just made the distance shorter and the geometry tighter, and that shorter distance and tighter geometry were not conditions that favored him. He tried to go up again. Battle Beast's hand closed on his cape and pulled. The maintenance deck section that followed was the specific kind of violence that happened when the environment removed all the factors that one party was relying on. No altitude, no open air, no theatrical distance. Just 2 things occupying the same confined space, and one of them considerably better at that kind of problem than the other. At close range, Homelander got the I-beam in twice. Both times, Battle Beast absorbed it and kept at him. He got his hands on Battle Beast's jaw and found the leverage to drive the head back hard twice. Both times, the head moved and returned, and the expression on his face did not change in the way that expressions change when a person is in genuine distress. The mace found the right angle on the 3rd attempt. And Homelander went through 2 bulkheads and came to rest against a support column that held. He lay against it for a moment. The left arm was worse than before. Several things in his torso were responding in ways they had not responded before this evening. He was still functional. His body's baseline was extraordinary, but the operating parameters had changed, and the parameters that remained were no longer the parameters of someone who controlled what happened next. He stood up. Battle Beast was standing in the gap where the 2 bulkheads had been. He looked at Homelander as he had looked at the sensor display on the 53rd level, reading, mapping, confirming. "You're the strongest thing they have," Battle Beast said. "Their whole world was built on that." "Yes," Homelander said. His voice was rough. "It was. You let them build it for you." Not an accusation, an assessment. How a chieftain assesses a rival who has held territory through inheritance rather than conquest. Homelander looked at him. The anger that had carried him through the past 20 minutes was still there. But it had changed character, no longer the anger of someone who believed the situation was temporary and manageable. Now, It was the anger of someone who had understood within the last few minutes that the story he had told about himself did not match the evidence being collected in this maintenance deck. "What, you want me to apologize for being what I am?" "No," Battle Beast said. "I want nothing from you." He moved. Homelander fought the last 3 minutes as he had never had to fight anything before, without the assumption of outcome, without the theater, without any structure to hide inside. He fought with everything his body had ever been capable of, and his body was capable of more than almost anything else in this world. Almost. He moved faster than Battle Beast could track cleanly and landed hits that would have ended any other fight, and each time Battle Beast absorbed them and answered, and the answers were not spectacular in the way that supersonic movement and eye fire were spectacular. But they were exact, and they accumulated, and the ledger of the fight was not ambiguous about which direction it ran. Near the end, Homelander drove himself upward through the ceiling into open air, trying to reset on familiar terms one more time. He surfaced on the tower's exterior, facing south, the city below him and the night sky above, and the logo of Vought International, somewhere above his head, still lit white against the dark. Battle Beast broke through the opening below him 8 seconds later. They were on the tower's exterior face, 400 feet above the street, in full view of every camera pointed at the building. Homelander looked at him. "I am the most powerful being on this planet," he said. The line had been in him his whole life, the bedrock, under every other thing, the sentence that everything else stood on. He said it now not as a threat, but as a statement of fact, the last fact that remained uncontested. Battle Beast looked at him for a moment. "On this planet," he said. Then he hit Homelander with the mace at full extension, using the tower's exterior face as the surface to push from. And the strike had the weight of something that had crossed the distance between stars. Homelander hit the exterior face below them, and hit it again, and came to rest somewhere far below, where the cameras on the street could not miss him. Battle Beast stood on the tower's exterior face for a moment, 400 feet up the city below. Still lit and ordinary, and now very quiet. He looked down at what had been Homelander. Not spectacular. Not what the world had been told to expect from the death of its strongest thing. Just the end of a body that had been given a great deal and had not become, in the end, what the receiving of it implied. He had been powerful. He had been the most powerful thing in this world's sky. He had not been a warrior. Battle Beast looked at the city for a moment. The streets far below had people on them who were very still, which was different from earlier when they had been moving. The cameras were still running. The logo above him was still lit. He turned and walked back through the breach and went down through the levels and out the north service access and into the night. On the street, no one moved for a long time. The cameras were still running, every one of them. 97,000 concurrent viewers and more joining every second as the clips spread outward from the scene, rippling through the same infrastructure that Vought had spent 20 years using to tell a particular story about what the world was and who protected it. The story had a different ending now. On the 41st level, Ashley Barrett was still at the window. She had been there for the duration. She had watched what the cameras caught of it through the glass, and she had not moved, and she had not called anyone because there was no call to make and no statement to issue that would make what had just happened into something other than what it was. The logo above the tower was still lit. That was the only thing that hadn't changed. She watched it for a while. Then she went back to her desk, sat down in front of her laptop, and opened a blank document. She sat in front of it for a long time. She did not type anything. The city outside was very quiet. The Vought logo was still lit at 11:47 p.m. This was a fact that several people would later describe as the detail that stayed with them. The white light at the summit of the tower still running on its own power supply, advertising something that no longer existed in the form being advertised. The building's communications infrastructure had been severed. The executive tier was empty. The lobby was a ruin. Somewhere below the service terrace, in a location that emergency response teams were still trying to reach through debris, was the body of the most powerful man in the country. The logo stayed on. The broadcast feeds were running too. That was the other thing. 97,000 concurrent viewers had become 400,000 in under 10 minutes, and 400,000 had become something the analytics systems weren't designed to process by the time the first emergency press briefing attempted to begin and was abandoned within 3 minutes because the person conducting it could not hear their own voice over the noise from the street. Battle Beast stood at the tower's edge for a moment after it was over. He looked at the city, not at the cameras, not at the people far below who had stopped moving and were looking up. At the city itself, the lit grid of it, the density, the organized chaos a civilization produces when it has been running long enough to mistake its own complexity for permanence. He had been on worlds that had burned, worlds that had been conquered, worlds that had eaten themselves from the inside out over long centuries. He had been on worlds where the strongest thing died in fair combat in front of witnesses. And the witnesses had gone on to build something that lasted or hadn't. The dying of a strong thing was never the ending. It was only the ending of the story that required the strong thing to be alive. This world had told itself a very long story. He turned from the edge and went down. At the north service exit, one person was standing in the corridor, not blocking, not confronting, just there. It was Sage. She looked at him without the quality most people had when they looked at him, the compound of fear and threat assessment and involuntary calculation of exits. She looked at him with the quality of someone examining a data point she had predicted and is now confirming. "You'll leave," she said, "not a question." "Yes." "There's nothing here for you." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "The system produced this. Whatever comes next, the same system will produce that too." Battle Beast looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is the problem with your world." He went out through the exit and into the night. Sage watched the door for a moment. Then she looked down at the display in her hand, the sensor grid of the tower still running, showing a warm signature moving away from the north service access at ground level heading west, moving at 40 miles per hour. Not running, not fleeing, just done. She put the display away and went back inside to see what was left to read. The first 6 hours after Homelander's death produced, depending on which feed you were watching, either the most important night in American history, or a hoax, a foreign operation, a false flag, a tragedy, a reckoning, a miracle, a warning, or the beginning of a collapse that had been coming for years. The hashtag Justice for Homelander tag peaked at 400 million impressions in the first 90 minutes. The hashtag Finally Free tag peaked 40 minutes later and crossed 500 million. Both tags were simultaneously trending in the same city blocks held by different people, looking at the same footage. Vaught's communications infrastructure was running on emergency local systems only, which meant Ashley's team could push to the 4 channels they still controlled and nothing else. The prepared holding statement, "Homelander is preparing a response," was already irrelevant. A different statement was being assembled from scratch at 11:52 p.m. in a document that had been started, deleted, restarted, and partially deleted again. The statement being assembled was not going well. Ashley sat in the 41st level office with her laptop open and a cursor blinking in a blank document and could not produce a sentence. This was new. She had spent 4 years producing sentences in circumstances ranging from catastrophic to genuinely unthinkable. And the sentences had always come not because the situations were manageable, but because her nervous system had been trained to reach for language as the first response to any input, the way a drowning person reaches for anything solid. The language had always been there. It wasn't there now. What was there instead was the metric dashboard on her secondary screen, which was still pulling social data because the feeds were live. She had stopped looking at the numbers 20 minutes ago, but the dashboard was updating. The numbers were not numbers she had ever been asked to manage. They were not numbers any communications framework had been designed to address. The problem she understood was not that she couldn't find the right words. The problem was that the right words would require her to describe something accurately. And describing it accurately would require acknowledging that the entire architecture of her professional life had been built to prevent this exact night from being describable. She had prevented a lot of nights. She had not prevented this one. She looked at the logo on the external camera feed, still lit. Her assistant had asked twice whether to shut it down manually, and she had said no both times without examining why. And she was only now examining why. And the answer was that she did not want to be the person who turned off the last thing that was still running as if everything were normal, because that person would then have to decide what to do next. And she was not yet ready to be that person. The cursor blinked. The logo stayed on. Sage found a secure terminal on the 39th level. The cluster there had been destroyed, but the terminal itself, physically separate from the network, was intact and spent 40 minutes reconstructing the last 6 hours pattern of data movement, political response, and public information spread. The data movement was not surprising. The files that had made it out before the servers went dark were already in enough hands to be irreversible. Congressional testimony would follow. Investigations would follow. The shape of that process would depend heavily on which political actors decided to use the material for advancement versus suppression. And the current split between those two groups was not stable and would not be for some time. The public information spread was also not surprising. 58% of the priority archive not transferred. That meant roughly half the most damaging documentation would surface, and roughly half would not, at least not immediately, which meant the narrative around Vaught's practices would be partial, contested, and prolonged rather than clean and decisive. That would allow a significant fraction of the institutional infrastructure to survive in modified form. What was interesting, not alarming, just interesting, was the shape of the political response in the first 4 hours. 3 separate power centers had already begun positioning themselves to fill the vacuum. 2 of them were familiar actors working familiar angles. The third was new, and its initial moves suggested a level of preparation that implied the vacuum had been anticipated. Sage noted this, filed it, continued reading. She was not unhappy about what had happened tonight. She was not happy about it either. She was present to it, which was different from both. Butcher sat on the hood of a car 2 blocks from the tower's perimeter and watched the emergency vehicles accumulate. He had the data from the sub-level relay on a drive in his jacket pocket. Communications architecture routing tables, asset coordination logs going back 14 months. Enough combined with what had made it out of the servers to make a sustained case that the relevant oversight bodies could not ignore without consequences that their members would prefer to avoid. He had known this was the end game. He had been building toward it since Knoxville, and before Knoxville if he was honest, which he generally preferred not to be. He had wanted Vaught's guts on a table in front of the people who were supposed to be watching Vaught, and that was more or less where the guts were going to end up. He had not wanted the rest of it, the convoy reroute, the 2 injured in the traffic incident, the secondary data facility in Jersey that Battle Beast had reached because Butcher had created the coverage gap that left it exposed, and 3 of the 4 people there had not walked out. He had not directed Battle Beast to that facility. He had created conditions under which Battle Beast would find that facility attractive, which was a distinction he was very clear about in his own mind, and very clear that it would satisfy exactly no one who mattered to him. He looked at the tower. He had wanted Homelander dead since the night he understood what Homelander was. That want had been the center of things for a long time. The center had been served tonight, and the center was still there. But it was not accompanied by the thing he had expected to accompany it. He had not expected joy, exactly. He had expected something. Release, maybe. Reduction. The sense of a weight lifted. What he had instead was the view from where he was sitting, which was an emergency services staging area in front of a partially destroyed skyscraper, while a city that didn't know what to do with the night worked out its options in real time on every screen visible from where he sat. M.M. came and sat on the hood next to him. Neither of them said anything for a while. "The Jenkins family," M.M. said finally. "I know. They live 3 blocks from the western coordinate. The reroute took the convoy through their intersection." "I know. Minor injuries, you said?" "Minor injuries? Dad's got a concussion. Daughter's got a broken wrist." M.M. was looking at the tower. "She's 8. Butcher said nothing. "I'm not asking you to apologize," M.M. said. "I know what that's worth from you. I'm asking you to know that it happened. Actually know it, not file it away." "I know it happened." "Okay." M.M. was quiet for a moment. "Then say it." Butcher looked at the tower, at the logo still lit at the top of it. "An 8-year-old has a broken wrist," he said, "because of a decision I made. And that's in the ledger, and it doesn't come out." "That's right," M.M. said. They sat on the hood of the car for a while longer. Starlight found Huey standing at the western perimeter looking at his phone. The phone was showing him the social feed, the cascade of reaction and counter-reaction and theory and grief and celebration and denial that had been running since 10:11 p.m., and he was scrolling through it with the expression of someone trying to find a pattern in something that didn't have one. She put her hand on his arm. "Did you think it would feel different?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I thought there'd be more of a before and after. Like a line." "There's no line." "No." He looked at the phone a moment longer, then put it away. "People are already making him a martyr. There are vigils in 6 cities." "I know." "And there are other people saying they never felt safer. Both things are happening simultaneously in the same country." "That's going to keep happening," she said. "For a long time. The footage exists. The evidence is out. People are going to use it for completely opposite conclusions, and there's nothing that changes that." Huey was quiet. "Then, what was the point?" Starlight thought about that for a moment. Genuinely thought about it, not the reflexive answer, not the version she would have given a year ago about truth and accountability and the long arc of justice. "I don't know," she said. "I think the point might just be that it's true, that what happened in that building is true. And it's out there now. And it can't be untrue. That's not a solution. But it's something." He leaned against her. "It doesn't feel like enough," he said. "No," she said. "It doesn't." They stayed at the perimeter until the emergency cordon moved them back, and then they moved back and the tower was still visible above the line of vehicles and the crowd and the cameras. The logo still lit white against the sky, advertising nothing. to no one in the quiet that had followed the end of what it had been built to protect. The logo finally went off at 2:14 a.m. Not because anyone turned it off. The backup power supply ran out. By then, the immediate crisis zone had been cordoned. The first congressional inquiries had been announced. Vought International stock had been halted, pending review, and approximately 240 million people in North America had watched at least one clip from the interior broadcast footage. The clips had been viewed, shared, contextualized, decontextualized, praised, mourned, weaponized, and disputed in every configuration available to the information infrastructure of the early 21st century. And the process was far from finished. The sky above the tower was dark, where the logo had been. Not empty, just dark. Battle Beast was already 100 miles west of the city, moving at ground level through a landscape that had no interest in him, heading toward nothing in particular, and no one in particular, because the particular was finished. What the world did with the space he had made in it was not his concern. It had not been a good place. It had not been a bad place, by the standards of the worlds he had known. It had been a civilization very good at making things look like what they were not, and very bad at surviving contact with a thing that could not be made to look like anything other than what it was. He had been here. He had found what he was looking for, not the answer he had hoped for, but an answer. The strongest thing this world could put up was a symbol, not a warrior, and symbols did not give him what he had crossed the distance between stars to find. He would go somewhere else. There were other stars.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.